Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of, what if reincarnated Naruto got harem? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Marcus Black hated his son. Perhaps hate was too tame a word. He loathed him. He absolutely despised him. Even the boy's name reflected that disgust. Mercury. He was poison. Tainted. Wrong. He'd killed his own mother to come into this world, taking the only woman Marcus ever cared about. He'd loved Melissa like no one else, and she was gone now, gone because of it. He made sure that little bastard knew it, too, every damn day of his life. From the moment he could understand words, walk, even talk. He tried to kill him more times than he could count. And yet despite that, the little shit just would not die. Smother him with a pillow, he laughed. Drown him, bastard held his breath. Blades didn't pierce him. Poison tasted sweet to him. It took a dozen hits just to make him bruise, and dust rounds plain bounced off his body before he even unlocked his aura. Afterward, not happening. Little shit healed faster than he could break him. Worse, he never stopped smiling. Never stopped cracking those damn jokes. And so Marcus sought another method. If he couldn't break the boy's body, then he'd settle for shattering Mercury's mind. He beat him, disguised it as training, wielding the excuse like a blade, never letting him rise above who he was. He'd make sure his so-called son would be broken, one way or another. This is a crutch. Every day of training was a beating. This makes you weak. He never went easy on him. You can leave when you get strong. Mercury took it without complaint. Where could he run? They lived in the mountains. Alone. There was nowhere for him to go. But the boy got strong. Too strong. Clever, too. He started tinkering with things. Made some weird leg tech for himself. Rocket boots he called them, the better to help with his kicks. He threatened to take them, once. Not the boots, but the boy's legs. Swore he'd cut them off at the knee with a rusty saw. You can try. His son hadn't looked up from his workbench. Might not like what happens. There was something in his eyes when he said, whatever it was, it spooked Marcus. He hadn't been able to follow through on that threat. Mercury kept his legs, but hated his bastard boy all the more. Days bled into weeks, then months, followed by years. His boy was getting strong all right, too big for his britches. So he did what any proper father would do. He put him in his place. Mercury's semblance was a simple thing. Downright useless, really. It let him control the wind. What use had an assassin of the wind? And so Marcus used his semblance to steal Mercury's while he slept. It was an easy thing to take someone's semblance, catch them off guard, or barring that, beat down their aura till it broke, and get a hand on them. He had done it countless times before, amused himself by taking the semblances of powerful people and giving them to the highest bidder. Anyone was fair game, so long as they paid for his services. Discreetly, of course. A gift like his had to be kept secret, otherwise he'd have the four kingdoms howling for his head. He didn't do that anymore. Things had gotten too hot. There was a reason he hid away in the mountains of Vale these days. But none of that mattered now. Now he reached in, grabbed his son's semblance, and yanked. Nothing happened. The hell, baffled, he closed his eyes and tried again. Nothing. Mercury didn't budge in his bed. He continued to sleep like the dead. Arrogant little shit. Even in sleep he pissed him off. A third attempt was met with a third failure, and here at last Marcus felt the barest beginnings of dread. What was going on here? Nothing like this had ever happened to him before. It was almost like he didn't have a semblance at all. His world went black. An unfamiliar voice hummed in his ear. So you finally figured it out. It sounded like Mercury, but not him, as though someone were speaking over him, with him, through him. He spun, flailing in the dark, and found himself face to face with a stranger, a blond boy bearing whiskered cheeks, blue eyes, and a smile so bright and wide that it left him looking more than a little unhinged. He had no way of knowing what he'd done in reaching inside Mercury to take his semblance. He'd reached too deep. Seen something he shouldn't have. What is this? Marcus cursed himself for the crack in his voice. Who are you? I am your son. The stranger replied. Lies, I've never met you. I am. The baffling blonde tittered softly. Or at least my body is. My spirit, however, well. He shrugged one shoulder, still wearing that selfsame smile. I won't bore you with the specifics of reincarnation. You can call me Mercury if you like, or Naruto. Doesn't matter. I really got the short end of the stick this time around, having a parent like you. All my life you've wanted me dead. Dead anger sparked in the old assassin's chest, burning away his fear. Of course I wanted you dead, you rotten little shit. You took the one thing I loved and you refused to die. You are no son of mine. I am your son. The boy seemed almost sad to say it. I have always been your son. I gave you so many chances to change, but you wasted each one. I humored you, I pitied you, I even tolerated you, because you had things to teach me, skills to impart, lessons I needed to learn. You see, he paced away, thumbing his chin. I never was one for stealth, blending into a crowd, or trailing a mark. A laugh burst out of him. You'd think I would know these things after all. I was a shinobi. But I didn't, so I took the chance to learn. Marcus grit his teeth and tried to speak. A scathing look silenced him. But he didn't learn. Not once. His son was speaking again, his smile shrinking with each passing instant, until only a scowl remained. I was willing to put up with a lot. But you made one fatal mistake. You tried to take away what was mine just now. So I'm going to take what's yours. A hand found his throat, forcing the connection between them wide open. That's an awful semblance you've got there. The boy hummed. Just like you, all you do is take. You call me a poison, but you're just plain rotten, a leech who steals from the weak. You know, his grin returned in full force. You've given me an idea. I don't have a semblance, so let's put that gift of yours to good use. Something tore in his chest. Cold. He felt cold and empty, like someone had reached inside him to tear out his heart. Marcus looked down, half expecting to find a hole in his chest. But there was no wound. His aura crackled dully as Mercury withdrew his hand. His eyes were glowing, pulsing a deep white. So that's what it feels like to have a semblance. Mercury muttered to himself. Not bad. Not bad at all. I could get used to this. And in a single, horrifying instant, Marcus Black knew what he'd lost. Why, you little, give it back. Gee, let me think about no. The boy dropped him and delivered a crushing kick to his chest. Marcus felt a wall shatter against his back. Another. Yet another. Another still, now. He didn't even realize he'd been thrown outside until his back struck the grass. Momentum was cruel. It dragged him arse over elbow, sending him tumbling. His aura crackled dully, shielding him from the worst of it until his skull finally struck something solid. The world went black yet again. Marcus awoke in what felt like an instant, but it must have been far longer because now he smelled smoke. No, against his better judgment the old assassin struggled to his feet and found his home in flames. Great fingers of fire reached toward the night sky to scrape at the moon, bathing the world in almighty orange glow. The roof caved in with a ponderous groan as he looked on. He watched Mercury walk among the wreckage, breathing fire, how completing the destruction of the last thing he held dear. Would you look at that? His bastard boy belted out a laugh and spread his arms wide. Some of Sasuke's jutsu came in handy after all. I'll have to thank him someday. What in the god's name was a jutsu? No, never mind that he'd kill him for this. Marcus snarled and lurched forward. Oh, you're still alive. Mercury turned to face him, silhouetted in the inferno. Sorry about that. His grin returned and Marcus quailed. Give me a second. Marcus tried to fight back, for what little good it did him. His son was stronger, better, faster. He swept through his guard like it didn't even exist, as though it wasn't even there. A slap on his wrist distracted him, a kick to the chin stunned him, a vicious punch drilled through his gut and finished him. He stood there, quavering, balking at the bloody arm thrust into his stomach. Why, you little murderer, I am what you made me, Dad. Mercury ripped his limb free and then there was pain. Blood fountained forth from the wound. Bereft of balance, the older assassin pitched forward onto his hands and knees. A sweeping kick cut those out from under him and he fell to the ground. Blood began to pool beneath him. Panic mounted his mind. Death. This was death. No one would find him here in the mountain. He would bleed to death, alone and forgotten. No, not like this. He deserved more. He was Marcus Black, Bane of Kingdom, Snatcher of Semblances, Slayer of Hunters. Thanks for the experience, old man. Mercury raised a boot over his head. For what it's worth, you were a good teacher. He stomped down on his skull. Have a nice death. Cinder saw the fight from the tree line. No, that wasn't it. A fight implied balance. This was a slaughter. She saw the older man fall to the younger, to his better. He was beaten, butchered, practically beheaded. Something in her stirred at the sight. Violence had always been a means to an end for her, but watching someone be dispatched so casually, it roused her inner fire like nothing else. This was strength. This was power. This was an individual who wasn't afraid to kill. As she drew near, she noticed this young man didn't have so much as a scratch on him. His dark hair was unkempt from captivity, his pale face and clothes dirty, but beyond that he was the very picture of health. Promising. She'd circumvented the city in favor of coming straight here. Alone. It had been a risk, but now she felt it was one worth taking. If she had delayed, she might have missed such a sordid slaughter. The young man noticed her at last. His stance shifted ever so slightly, regarding her not as a prey might a predator, but from one hunter to another. Good. She had no need of fearful whelps. He considered her for a long moment, arms loose at his sides. At length he crossed them before his chest and planted his feet. Can I help you? Perhaps you can. Cinder adopted her most pleasant smile. I'm looking for Marcus Black. The young man gestured to the corpse at his feet. There to go. I'm afraid he isn't much of a talker. Her smile became a touch more genuine. A sense of humor. Curious, but not objectionable. It was a pity to lose someone who could steal semblances, but his skill had clearly been lacking. Salem might say otherwise, but she didn't have to know about this now, did she? You're his son. The silver-haired lad didn't answer. I saw your fight from the tree line. She spoke into the silence that stretched between them. He's taught you well. Guess so. He shrugged one shoulder. Can't complain too much. He had skills I needed to learn, and I learned them well enough. He wasn't affected by her beauty. Not in the least. Most were. This one watched her like a hawk, eyes never once leaving hers, his stance loose and ready to move at the slightest provocation. Capable, ruthless, not easily swayed, yet not afraid to speak his mind. It made her want him all the more. He'd make a useful pawn. What's your name? She asked. Mercury. Mercury. It was all she could do to keep herself from licking her lips. Tell me, are you anything like your father? He considered her for a long moment. A very long moment indeed. Cinder forced herself to be patient. And then his smile grew. Not at all. But you don't strike me as a good person. Strange for the son of an assassin to say, but she chose to humor him. No, she smiled. I am not. I know. I can tell, sense it. Mercury tilted his head, considering her in a different light, one that had her smile faltering. Eureka. She wasn't sure she liked what he implied by that. Well, I guess this works out. There's something I wanted to test in any case, and I would have felt bad picking on an innocent. You'll do. Cinder blinked. For what? In the same instant, her sixth sense shrieked a warning. She flung herself forward. That saved her life. It did not, however, save her from the boot that barreled into the back of her head. She slammed forward into the dirt, ate a face full of mud, and skidded across the ground for several feet until momentum finally took pity on her and let her go. She was left there, fuming. That little churl, he dared strike her no matter. She'd put him in his place. He would serve, willingly or otherwise. Oh, man. The son of Marcus Black lowered his leg. Why'd you have to go and do that? It would have been painless if you let me break your aura. Her temper sparked, and her semblance with it, she grabbed a fistful of dirt, superheated it, and flung it his way in a storm of scorching glass. Mercury shielded his face with a grunt, retreating half a step. Had she underestimated him after all? Is that your best? Cinder pushed herself upright to sneer at him. You're not half the killer your father was. You're weak. Heh. In truth, she'd said the words to irk the boy, throw him off his game, make him angry and sloppy. She wasn't prepared for the laughter. It started with a slow snicker, a low sardonic sound as Mercury shook his head side to side, setting his hair swaying, as though she'd just told an awful joke. Why did it feel like she was about to be the butt of one? Stop it, stop laughing. Pathetic. A wide, shite-eating grin stretched across the boy's face. It made him look unnatural, inhuman. His eyes glowed like diamonds lit from within. Cinder shivered despite herself as he spoke again. If you actually believe I'm weak, you're so pitiful. In fact, you deserve a hug. The son of Marcus cracked his neck. It's true, I'm not quite the powerhouse I once was. He rolled his shoulders once and began to bounce in place, loosening up his limbs for some reason she didn't understand. Kurama didn't follow me into this strange second life of mine, much as I wanted him to. What in blazes was a Kurama? However, and here those black eyes gleamed gold. Just because I'm weaker doesn't make you stronger, does it? He was still speaking when he brought his right foot down and stomped. The earth shattered for miles around in every direction. Cinder leaped back. Mistakes were made. Because the bastard met her in the air, no above her, a fist swung back, crackling with power. His grin was a manic thing now, almost cheerful. Those golden eyes held her, serene yet furious, warm yet so terribly cold. Even as she reached back for her blades, she knew she wouldn't make it in time. Sorry, Mercury rasped down at her. But there's only one way you're getting out of this. Quietly cuddle up, tremble in fear, and take a dirt nap. One punch, that was all it took. One punch and she crashed into the earth like a meteor. Her aura didn't break. Her aura shattered, splintered, like so much glass. And then Mercury was upon her. An open palm slammed down on her chest, spearing her into the dirt. She flushed despite the danger. Pervert. Oh, please. Golden eyes rolled at her. I'm not even touching them. Now then. Quite suddenly those gleaming orbs glowed like incandescent diamonds. Cinder felt something clench deep inside her, an unseen fist closing around her very soul, and then it yanked. She tried to resist whatever it was, but that only made it all the worse. Cold. Why did she feel so cold? No, not just cold, now. It hurt, it hurt, it hurt, it hurt. She couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just as quickly, the agony ended, leaving Cinder to cry out and slump forward on her hands and knees. Wasted and gasping for air, she was powerless to resist when Mercury kicked her legs out. Her limbs buckled as a boot hit her ribs, nudging her onto her back. She batted at his leg to no avail. The bastard didn't budge. Huh. Mercury rose to his feet and tutted above her. So that's what it feels like. Let's see here. As she looked on aghast, he grabbed a bit of dirt from the road, squeezed his hand around it, and frowned. Heat flared from his fist. His hand opened to reveal a crude chess piece carved from black glass, shaped in the likeness of a queen. Why do you no checkmate? That shouldn't be possible. Cinder reached for her semblance. Nothing came. She felt only that old and awful cold. Her eyes drifted back to Mercury, watching him fiddle with the glass in his hand. Realization broke like the dawn, and horror with it, a dread she hadn't experienced since she was a small child in Atlas. Her semblance wasn't gone. It was right there, in his hand. Or at least her calm countenance cracked. She reached up for him. That's mine, give it back. Nope. He wagged a finger at her as though she were some naughty little girl. I'll be keeping this. You won't be needing it where you're going. He grimaced for a moment, then crushed the glass in his hand and reforged into the shape of a blade. You know, I never did get your name. No. Not like this. She was meant for more than this. Shesh couldn't die. Harish had a destiny. She was meant to be a maiden. Meh. You look like one of those Valian strippers. Probably doesn't matter. Mercury shrugged his shoulder and braved the blade in his offhand. Dead women tell no tales and all that. Hold still and I promise to make this painless. Cinder crawled backwards like a drunken crab. Wait, I can help you. We can make a deal. I can give you riches, power. Tell me what you want. What I want? Mercury paused, considering. And then he smiled. I want you dead. The blade of hardened glass stabbed down through Cinder's eye, into her skull. She felt a blinding instant of pain, saw a searing second of light, then nothing at all. Neat. He didn't feel anything. Naruto drew back, considering the corpse beneath him. Killing her hadn't brought him any satisfaction. None whatsoever. Was that a good thing? He could feel her semblance thrumming in his veins even now, so he supposed she'd been a successful test. But still, he felt no remorse, only curious. Just how many semblances could he use at once? No, never mind that. How many could he take? A lot. It felt like a lot. He was sure this world had plenty of people like Marcus and whoever that stripper girl was. My name is Cinder. For a moment, just a moment, he could have sworn he heard a lost soul screaming in incoherent rage. Or maybe it was the wind meh. Probably not important. Leaving the mystery woman's body at his feet, he never did get her name. He turned to face the tree line. It was getting awfully dark, and he knew that spectacle had attracted attention. Sure enough, a pack of angry red eyes stared out at him from the tree line, drawn by the negativity. Grim bah. Those were no fun. They died too easily. A gray brow rose, and with it, just a touch of killing intent. Well, come on then. Test your might. Heh. Gotta love the old references. To their credit, the Grim weren't stupid. He wasn't wounded, and they'd seen him just dismantle someone in record time. He'd killed 2 people, walked away unscathed. That implied strength. Even animals knew better than to stick their noses where it hurt. Most retreated. Most, but not all. There was an outlier. A massive beast rose from the brush with a rumbling growl. Standing on its hind legs, it loped forward in a crude walk to loom over him. Its shadow alone dwarfed high. Wheel. Naruto whistled up at it, almost impressed despite himself. You're an alpha, ain't you? Don't see your kind around these parts. Aye. It snarled at him, but didn't attack. Not mindless. This one had a spark of intelligence. Time to give it a push. He beckoned with one hand. You feeling lucky, punk? It lunged, devouring the distance between them in an instant. Up high, he jumped over a clawed paw. Down low, ducked under snapping jaws. Too slow. Laughed now as it tried to tackle him. On a whim, he caught its 4th swipe on a metal bracer, forcing its arm high. He heard the ground buckle beneath his boots. His legs didn't. The armor on his legs held, reinforced. It pushed down on him with both claws, trying to overpower him. What else could you expect from a monster? It might have intelligence, but it clearly had no idea how to use it. He stomped a foot, creating a wave of jagged glass in its wake to slap it in the face, breaking its concentration. The Alpha Grim staggered, lowering its head. Perfect. He pivoted. A single high kick brought his boot level with its face. Gotcha. A twist of his heel ignited the dust rounds within the chambers, and an almighty crack filled the air. The beast's head and a good chunk of its upper torso besides burst beneath the buckshot. What remained crashed to the ground with a wet thud. Almost immediately it began to dissolve. Right, he'd forgotten all about that. Pity. He would have liked to take a trophy. He stepped over its crumbing corpse and eyed its fellows. Anyone else want to try their luck? I still need to get used to this semblance. The Grim fled into the trees. Well, alright then. If they were going to hound him, he wasn't about to waste energy hunting them. Which left him with one last choice. He spun on his heel, considering the rapidly darkening horizon. We've got wilderness to the left, wilderness to the right, and more wilderness everywhere in sight. A frown creased his pale, dirty face. Lovely. The possibilities are endless. Sarcasm dripped from his every word. Wherever will I go? Remnant held no answers for him. No divine providence, no bolt of light from the blue, no declarations from the divine, nothing. No surprise there. The gods of this world were assholes. They didn't care about their people, their creations, any of it. If they did, maybe the world wouldn't be such a shitty place to live. Kurama would have picked a direction for him by now. He missed him more than words. On a whim he picked a direction at random. Let's go north, and started walking. Some might have called it a poor choice, but it was his. Nothing else mattered. It was the beginning of a mad journey that would see the 4 kingdoms of Remnant turned on theirs heads. The world had feared the name Marcus Black. Naruto decided Mercury would inspire an altogether different legacy. He was going to Banefamous. He put a spring in his step. Maybe I'll catch a train somewhere if I can find one. In hindsight, he really should have skipped the train. Naruto needed more. More knowledge, resources, food, clothing. You name it, he craved it. Perhaps that was greedy of him. No, it undoubtedly was. Marcus Black had given him a slim education at best. He knew only the bare bones about Remnant, its sites, its people. Whatever connections Marcus had died with him, which left Mercury, his so-called son, with no wealth, fame, or power. No, he had plenty of the last one. Skill and speed as well. He had his name, his memories, and the new semblance he'd stolen from that rotten golden-eyed woman. He'd be adding more to his collection soon, taken from other ne'er-do-wells he encountered on his journey. Sometimes, if he listened closely, he could almost hear the golden-eyed woman's voice sometimes. My name is Cinder, I will not be silenced. Hopefully that was his imagination. He didn't much relish the idea of having someone living rent-free in his head. Kurama was the only one allowed that privilege. Don't ignore me. No scroll to speak of either. Marcus never trust him with one. The old man's phone was a twisted lump of molten metal back in the house. He'd have to acquire one of his own. That, and Leon. Also important. Couldn't very well spend the rest of his days living in the wilds now, could he? Well, he could, but that would be boring. He wasn't here to be boring. You're going to ignore me, aren't you, you rat bastard? His sensory abilities were still intact at least. It wasn't hard to track down dinner. The woods were teeming with life. He found Big Buck and killed it quickly, snapping its neck before it even realized it was in danger. Just like that, he'd acquired dinner. For the evening, he knew enough from his first life to skin a meal and start a fire pit. Finding shelter was somewhat more difficult given the approaching storm, but once again, he wasn't without his means or methods. Nor was he alone for that matter. 100 clones were summoned, each set to the nearby trees with a will, and in an hour, he had himself a cozy little linto built around his fire, in which he could ride out the rain and eat in peace. Just as well he did it that because it started pouring shortly after the lads set the roof and dispelled themselves. With an ominous flash of lightning and a peal of dark thunder, the heavens opened up. Sheets of rain fell forth to drench anyone foolish enough not to take shelter. He heard the wind shriek angrily, rattling the trees above in childlike protest against the sudden storm. He hummed aloud. Wind's howling. From there it was merely a matter of waiting for the venison to cook over the fire. Not like he had anything better to do but wait. The fire crackled. He smelled something, then. The faint scent of a fall breeze rose over the aroma of cooked meat to tickle his nose, which didn't make much sense, given it was the middle summer. He heard something. Out there, in the dark. Sensed it. A powerful presence slogging his way with slow, determined strides. They must have seen his fire. Not a predator, but a human. Well, maybe tonight wouldn't be so boring after all. Naruto perked up, plastered a winning smile to his face and called out into the gloom. Hello there, stranger. Amber was freezing. Tiny gasps escaped her and little plumes of steam as she clutched at herself with one arm, the other tugging her horse on by the reins behind her. So cold, so very cold. But she couldn't stop here. It was too open, too exposed, with no cover to speak of. They had no choice but to slog on and hope for an outcropping of some sort, maybe a hollow tree if they were lucky. Who was she kidding? She hadn't been lucky for some time now. Usually she would blame Kuro's semblance for that sort of thing. But all not quite. Uncle Kuro wasn't here now, was he? No, she was hiding from him now, too. Him and all of Ospin's agents. She just wanted to be free. Was that such a sin? Gods, she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. She'd given half of her last apple to her horse, Chestnut, just to keep her going. That had been what? Yesterday, the day before. Stupid of her, she knew. Horses could graze on grass, she knew, but there's so very little of it up here. She was no hunter despite her title. One could hardly eat a squirrel or bird after it had been blasted apart by a lightning bolt. That wasn't meant. It was charcoal. You couldn't eat bloody charcoal. She'd tried. Damn it. What was the point of having all this power if she couldn't stop a damn storm? She could create one well enough, but stopping it. Nope, not happening. When she first saw the fire, it brought Amber both relief and confusion. She squinted in the downpour, trying to make sense of it all. How could one be lit in a storm like this? It was impossible. When she realized it was a linto she was looking at, Amber damn near wept. Had her luck finally turned for the better? It had not. As she traipsed closer, her fears were confirmed. It was very much occupied. Someone sat beside the fire pit, turning the carved carcass of a deer on a spit. She couldn't see their face, but they saw her. Gray eyes, almost silver, really rose and saw hers across their way. They almost seemed to glow in the gloom, not unlike her own. They stared between the raindrops, gazing at one another for a long moment, for what felt like forever, until finally. Hello there, stranger. A wry grin plucked at the corner of the man's mouth. There's room by the fire, if you like. Amber couldn't flung herself inside fast enough. She damn near dropped her staff. Behind her, Chestnut nestled against the side of the building, using it as cover against the worst of the rain. She didn't even stop to think about her poor horse, and she'd kick herself for that ladder. But for now she needed warmth, and she needed it now. What brings you around these parts? I'm a traveler. She forced the words out through chattering teeth as she pressed her hands to the flame. Got a little turned around in the storm. You're a huntress, came the immediate rejoinder. Please don't insult my intelligence by lying to me. Amber winced despite herself, too cold to argue the point. What gave me away? Your clothes and armor for one. He waved a hand to hers. Also your staff. Who else would be out here in the wilds? She sneezed. And what about you? He tutted and made the stand. That's my business. Paranoia gripped her heart in an iron vice. He'd been right here, in the right place at the right time. Was he one of Ospin's? Out came her staff. Don't move. He granted her a flat look. The meat will go bad. I said don't move. Amber brandished her staff. Who are you? Just a stranger passing through, same as you. The young man didn't look up from the deer he was cooking. His eyes remained fixated on his meal roasting in the fire. Nevertheless, he held out both hands, revealing open palms. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you with any sudden movements. Firelight played over a pale, whiskered face in the gloom. It's dangerous in these parts. Amber's stomach growled. As I said, there's room for you by the fire, if you like. He gave the deer carcass another turn on the spit, nodded once to himself, and started caving it up. Plenty of this bugger to go around. You can let your horse graze outside. The storm will pass soon. She dithered still, torn between food or flight. For the love of the young man uttered an exasperated oath under his breath. Skittish little thing, fine. How about this? This is my fire you're warming yourself by, which makes you my guest and me the host. And as a proper host, I promise no harm will befall you under my protection. The fall maiden snorted despite herself. That's so cheesy. He shrugged. It sounded better in my head. He carved off a section of roasted thigh and offered it to her. You want some of this deer or not? I still don't know you are. You want my story? A bitter bite lanced its way into his words. Fine. My old man held captive in these mountains. He shrugged one shoulder. I killed him yesterday, been on my own ever since. His casual admittance of murder nearly had Amber choking on her meal. She thumped her chest and swallowed quickly. Your own father, in name only. He tore off a haunch of meat and started eating. He was scum. Beat me every damn day. Bastard deserved what he got. At least he was able to break his cage and take his fate into his own hands. Amber envied him that. She wished she could do the same. But she never could. Ospin was watching every town, every dock, every airport. She could hardly fight his agents, and killing them would only make him hunt her all the harder. No, so long as she held these powers, she could never truly be free. That was her truth. Some of it must have shone through on her face, because the youth plunked down on the log beside her. Seems like you were in a similar situation. I still am. Treacherous tongue, she hadn't meant to say that, I mean. You don't have to be. He offered her more venison, which she accepted all too eagerly. You could escape, like I did. Escape. A bitter bark of laughter burst from her. If only it were that simple. I'm not like you. There is no escape for me. Bullshit. He stomped a foot down, creating a small crater underfoot. There's always a way out. You just gotta be clever about it. Clever, he said. She'd already run away from Ospin. Was still running, in fact. But the man had spies everywhere. Her host could be one of them, for all she knew, a spy ready and willing to knock her out the moment she lowered her guard. Then he'd drag her back to Vale, back to Ospin, back to captivity in that lonely little house. She didn't want that. Anything but that. She just wanted to be free. I never got your name. No, he said softly, you didn't. Going to be cheeky was Amber. Mercury, the youth responded. Or Naruto. His shoulders rolled in a shrug. Haven't decided yet. She guffawed a little. On your name. Well, he granted her a wry grin. My old man named me Mercury to be cruel, so I might as well use another one where I can, right? Now there was an idea. I wish I could do that. Once again the words escaped her before she could think to hold them back. Just choose a new name and start over. Stop being hunted. You could and you can. He considered her for a long moment, eyes flicking up and down the length of her. They didn't linger like some leches she'd know, but instead considered her, as though imagining something in the back of her head. At length, he spoke again. If folks are looking for you, disguise yourself. Grow your hair out, dye it, wear colored contacts, different clothes, throw your weapon away and get another. Abandon her staff. Amber recoiled at the thought and reflexively reached back to touch it. Never, or don't, Mercury amended at the baleful look in her eyes. It's your choice, but you'll never be free if let fear hold you back. And if people come after me, then fight them. He booped her nose with a finger, drawing a scowl to her lips. Break a few bones if you have to. Make an example of them, show them you're not one to be crossed. If they keep coming afterwards, cripple them. Break them. Make it too painful to even consider fighting you. Lightning flashed outside, echoing his shout with a deafening peal of thunder. It sounded so tempting. To just let go, cut loose and live free. But she was afraid. Terribly, horribly afraid. I can't. She shook her head. It's a nice offer, but can't. I'm sorry. Don't be. The wood assassin shrugged one shoulder and leaned back. Just think about it. I've had enough to eat in any case. Want me to take first watch? No. She shook her head, still wary of him despite his impassioned speech. I'll take first watch. As you like. Mercury shrugged and settled down, tucking himself into a corner to rest. In a matter of moments, he was fast asleep. Amber watched the storm rage outside. Just cut and run, or was it really that easy? Unbeknownst to her, Mercury's words had planted a seed in her heart. A shiver shot down Ospin's spine. He felt it. An awakening. A disturbance, for lack of a better word. Just now, some way, someone, somehow, something had irrevocably changed. Bah, it was probably nothing. Maybe he was coming down with a cold. Amber departed the next morning. She had to, if only because she dare not linger any longer. If she stayed, she was going to get even more ideas, and her mind was already churning. Mercury didn't seem at all surprised to see her go. He must have known she wouldn't linger long. In a rare show charity, he both wrapped and offered her what remained of the venison, a good bit, yet persisted despite their feast, and she was all too happy to accept the gift. She could always freeze it with her maiden powers once she was out of sight. It would keep longer that way. Still, she felt she owed him something in return. Here. She held out her scroll towards HM. Mercury blinked. Here what? I'm offering you my number, silly. When he blinked again, realization dawned. You really don't have a scroll? Nope. He patted his empty pockets. Held captive. Remember, old man didn't trust me with one. Oh gods, she could feel her face going red. Then here. Amber handed him her wallet and the generous amount of lien within. You'll need this more than me. I can always make more by taking on odd jobs. On a whim, she withdrew a pen and a scrap of parchment from her belt pouch, then quickly scribbled her scroll number down on it. There you go. She didn't dare look at his face for fear of what she might find there. I can give you directions to the next town too, if you like. It's not all that far off from the forest. Really, the glee in the young man's voice had her visage burning an even deeper shade of red. Thanks. He clasped her hands in his and shook them fiercely. You're a lifesaver. Huh. She'd never held hands with a boy before. Was this what it felt like? Mercury Naruto drew her forward abruptly, pulling her into a fierce embrace. His chin came down over her shoulder and she absolutely froze. Don't worry. He patted her head. I've got your back. I'll get in touch with you as soon as I find a workable scroll. Steam. Amber could feel her face going absolutely nuclear pink. Nice meeting you. I'll see you later. Bye. She babbled out directions, followed by a quick goodbye, and pivoted away from him before he could think to protest. From there she vaulted onto Chestnut's back, cracked the reins once, and they were off. She rode hard and fast, not once daring to look back. A small part of her wondered if she would ever see him again. Would he keep his word? Would it change anything? No, surely not. She wasn't that lucky. Was she? Oh, poor Amber. How little she knew. Cinder had perished. Salem tutted softly from her throne. She hadn't reported in for more than a day now, which could only mean that someone, somewhere, must have killed her. The Fall Maiden perhaps unfortunate, but not expected, given her disposition. That girl had always been too arrogant for her own good. Even a relatively untrained maiden could catch one unaware. No matter, I'll find another. And she would. Remnant had no shortage of malleable souls. After all, she had nothing but time. It wasn't as though anything in this world was a threat to her. So, this was Vale. How incredibly disappointing. Naruto wrinkled his nose at the smell as much as the people. This wasn't even the main city, but rather one of the larger town on its peripherals. What had they called it? Slate. Ugly name for an ugly place. Everything here was soggy. The walls matched the namesake, and the buildings more so. Even the market itself seemed worn down. Vendors hawked their wares around him with a subdued air, as though waiting for a bolt of lightning to fall out the sky and smite them. Still, this was as good a place to start as any. He might be able to get himself a scroll here or swipe one from a passing thug if it came down to that. Barring such an action, he could at least use a chance to reprovision himself before he set out again. Why pay when you can take what is rightfully yours? An awfully familiar voice oozed in his ear. You have power. Use it. Nope. He was hearing things again. Craning his neck, he regarded a vendor hawking candied apples. They didn't look all that healthy, but the journey had whet his appetite enough to risk one. 5 lien later and he had his prize. The delightful crunch soothed his soul. It tasted like freedom. It also gave him something to chew on while he planned his next move. Step 1. Acquire a scroll and get in touch with Amber. Step 2. Keep an eye out for useful semblances. Step 3. Profit. In truth, he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to once he started swiping the semblances from bad guys. Sure, he wanted it all, but to what end? What did he intend to do with it? Start his own empire, take over the world? Maybe sounded like too much work for him. What, then where did it all lead to? What was his final goal? You cannot be serious. You don't even a plan, do you? I died to this. Meh, he'd figure something out. He felt something settle over his mind without warning, a vague tickle in the back of his brain. He paused, stride slowing. He knew the signs by now. Jinjetsu? No, this was more subtle. An illusion semblance. He felt it fall over his psyche like a shroud. Or it would have, if he hadn't known exactly what to look for. True, he didn't have Kurama to burn it out of him, but he had other ways. It was a simple matter of flooding himself with sage chakra. Silver-gray eyes blazed gold as he looked around, and sure enough, the feeling faded. Whoever had chosen him for a mark had evidently reconsidered. But who? Aha, over there. He craned his neck and found a girl speaking to a street jeweler of some sort, a portly man, who offered her a large ruby ring. As he looked on, she took it right out his hand and placed it in her pocket. The man smiled at her all the while and wished her a good day, blissfully unaware of what had been taken from him, as though he didn't even see her. Clever girl. The strange feeling came back again, and he realized she'd targeted him again. Pride, perhaps, or maybe she just didn't like him. Not so clever. He feigned ignorance and pretended to consider the stands. Sure enough, he felt a hand slip into his pocket. He let it. Grinned now, as tan fingers closed around. Nothing. Sorry. He turned to face the culprit, but I'm afraid you won't find anything there. He kept the money Amber had given him tucked beneath his shirt. Good luck getting that. He found himself face to face with a haggard teen nearly his own age, red eyes framed by pale green hair and a look of complete and utter terror plastered across her face. Her breath hitched. You can see me. Sure can, little Miss Thief. Thief, the jeweler cried a ways behind them. She's the one who stole my ring, don't let her go. She spat in his face. Naruto recoiled and let her slip free. Sure enough, she bolted. Well, all right, then. Finally some excitement. It wasn't hard to find her once he gave chase. She might have known these streets, but right now she was panicked, frightened, not thinking straight. He was faster than her, stronger too, and well-fed. Truth be told, he could have run her down in less than a minute. Instead he let her get ahead of him, let her lead him away from the angry jeweler and his friends. From there he herded her into a dead end of her own making. Soon enough, high walls loomed on either side of them, leaving only one escape, an exit he even now blocked with his body. She'd have to fight through him to get out now. It was a battle she'd lose. He assessed her again at glance. Tall, thin, wearing the bottom half of what might have been mud-green dungarees paired with a faded top. She looked lean, downright skinny, and yet she'd done something incredible. He considered taking her semblance on a lark and thought better of it. This was no monster or murderer or crazy woman who craved power. Hey, this was just a girl trying to survive. And besides, he was curious. How did you do that? The girl growled and went for her weapons holstered behind her back. Don't, Naruto tutted, weaving a warning into his words. Unless, of course, you want them to hear you. Sure enough, her hands fell away. Her angry scowl did not. What do you want? Already told ya, Greenie. By the brothers, that was a bad nickname. He'd need a better one. Mint, maybe. Come on now, don't make me repeat myself. How'd you do it? Was that your semblance? Oh, yes it was. He could see the panic in her eyes now. I didn't do anything, just leave me alone. Him. His head bobbed, ignoring her demand completely. I've known my fair share of liars and thieves. Burglary is an art of patience, coordination, and in a pinch, sleight of hand. He flicked a lien card between one finger to another as his smile grew another inch. But you didn't take that ring in your pocket. Her eyes widened as he spoke and she reflexively grasped at her belt, to no avail. He wasn't finished with her. That nasty old jeweler gave it to you, right before my eyes. And he smiled. She gulped. Who are you? Plenty of things, none of which he felt like telling her at this moment. She could be an asset. He should recruit her. He ignored the voice again. Mind was playing tricks on him. Must be. He didn't want to consider the alternative. Think of me as an interested party, he said instead. But for now, he reached into the pouch behind his back. Here. The would-be thief scowled at him. What the hell is that? It's just a bit of bread. He held it out to her. Eat it or starve. Your choice. She hesitated. He could see the hunger in her eyes. Eventually, it won out. Tan fingers curled around the loaf. It was still warm, fresh from the bakery he'd raided during their short-lived chase. She looked to him, then the bread, back to him again, no doubtlessly fearing he'd take it from her. When he didn't, she ripped it from his hands and all but shoved it into her mouth. Slow bites, now, he cautioned her. Don't choke. There's plenty more where that came from. She obeyed hesitantly. That a girl. He patted her head, mussing up her hair. Stick with me, and you'll never go hungry again. What's your name? Emerald. She gasped out the word between famished bites. And name's Emerald. Nice to meet ya, Emerald. I'm Mercury. Let's get along, eh? In that instant, he gained any ally for life. What did Mercury want from her? Emerald knew he had to be after something. He must. Everyone was. They always were. And yet this Mercury hadn't made so much as a single demand of her since he'd met her. Not a one. Far from it, rather than order her around, he'd taken her to the first diner he could find, and summarily treated her to a full-course meal. It was more food than she'd ever seen in her life. Burgers and steak and even cake. Cake, actual chocolate cake, not too sweet or too sugary either, the kind with decadent frosting that absolutely melted in your mouth. Emerald could barely remember the last time she had cake. She dimly recalled eating some when she was very young, but beyond that, nothing. Nor did Mercury stop there. Not only did he let her eat her fill until she was full, but he let her pack up the leftovers, of which there was a great deal in neat little containers supplied by the diner. A few patrons had scoffed and turned up their noses at her for that, but Emerald didn't give a flying fig for what they thought. You didn't leave good food. Anyone who was anyone knew that. These people had money, they could afford to eat here all the time. She didn't and she couldn't, so she damn well wouldn't waste what she'd been given. Mercury just paid for it. All of it. Every bit. Like it was nothing. Just how much lien did this guy have on him? Now, with her aching stomach full and her frazzled nerves soothed, Emerald stared at herself in the mirror. She scarcely recognized the stranger gazing back at her. She had new clothes and no idea what to do with them. They wear what was the world comfortable, yeah, that was it. She'd grown so used to wearing rages or whatever she could get her hands on, but the Sethis were nice. He'd helped her replace her old outfit and pick a new one of her choosing. In place of the battered, dirty outfit she'd worn only yesterday, she now found herself clad in a mint green crop top with the shoulders pulled back beneath a cropped white quilted leather double-breasted jacket contrasted with black notch lapels and a belt looping at the bottom of the jacket's hem. Finishing off the ensemble were white skinny jeans and brown chaps that ended at her thighs with straps on her calves, the better to secure her weapons on her back. On a whim, she'd completed her outfit with a pair of brown ankle boots with metal plating over the toes for added protection. She'd even picked out a bit of jewelry for herself at Mercury's behest, a deep red ruby pendant that she now wore round her neck. Is this really me? She dared a smile, and pivoted a little, cocking one hip to the side, even as her reflection mirrored her. She looked good. She looked badass. She looked like a huntress. Oh gods, did he expect her to pay him back with what panic reared its ugly head in her heart and sent her thoughts into a tizzy? She turned a glare on her savior's back, trying to figure him out. Needless to say, she failed spectacularly. Because he baffled her, she knew he preferred the name Naruto and used Mercury as an alias, but beyond that nothing. Barely a hint of his intentions, whatever they were. He had been chipper and jovial with her for the most part after he'd taken her to this hotel, not one of those hotels, thanked the brothers, and just finished dressing himself after a brisk shower. Wasn't a bad room either. It hosted a shower in its bathroom, a small mini-fridge near the entrance just large enough to store her leftovers, and a television besides. She tried the latter. It didn't work. All in all, the room wasn't that bad at all if you liked cramped quarters, 2 threadbare beds and gray. Slate really was big on gray. Emerald hated gray. Give her green any day. There. Mercury stepped out the bathroom, idly running a towel through his still damp hair. How are you feeling? All right. She hazarded the word, deathly afraid of displeasing him. You can use the shower next, if you want. He plunked down onto the bed opposite her. Saved most of the hot water for you. There's a laundromat downstairs too, if you want to wash your old outfit for later. Later, she wasn't used to having a later. Her every waking moment had been spent in fuel moment. Well, Emerald bobbed her head in a quick nod, not trusting herself to words. The idea of a shower sounded absolutely divine, as did clean clothes, wearing them even more so. It still begged the question as to why he wanted her clean. She didn't dare ask, but she'd damn well take his kindness while it lasted. Good. Mercury took his silence for acceptance and flung himself back onto his bed with a pleased sigh. We won't be staying here long if I can help it. Maybe a day or two at most. He raised his head to look her way. You can talk, you know, Emerald. I won't get mad, no matter what you say. Could she speak her mind without consequences? Go ahead. He waved her on. Take your time. Why are you being so nice to me? The words burst out of her like a dam, and that was it. She couldn't stop herself anymore. Fear gave her heart wings and she started babbling. You've treated me to dinner, bought me nice clothes, and now you want me to take a shower. What do you get out of this? A strong and happy ally, I hope. He offered her his hand. You have a powerful semblance. She cut him off with a glower. So you just want me for my ability? He startled her with a peal of laughter. Hey Hano. His mirth cut off abruptly with a fearsome frown. It was a surprisingly frightening expression. Look, he ran a hand through his hair. If I wanted your semblance, I would take it. Those eerie eyes of his were gold for a moment, white the next, then suddenly silver again. But I don't, and I won't. You seem to have a good set of skills. We can build on those. Emerald worried her lower lip between her teeth. I'm not a whore. Yeesh, so feisty. Mercury heaved a sigh, but remained unflappable as ever, even now in the teeth of her suspicion. I never said you were one of those. I think you're in need of a helping hand. I won't force you to do something you don't want to do. You're welcome to walk out of here right now. I won't stop you. She didn't budge. No, he laughed at her hesitation. Should have expected that. You're like me. A roguish grin tugged at whiskered cheeks. You've had a taste of the high life and you can't bear to let it go. She really had. Emerald liked living this way after a life spent on the streets of Slate. It wasn't something she wanted to give up. Her semblance had its limits. No matter how many pockets she pilfered or jewelry she took, the fact remained that she'd come from nothing. She couldn't even remember who her parents were, or if she even had any. Her earliest memory consisted of a man running with her in his arms. Beyond that, nothing. All her memories were here, in this awful town. She'd thought she would die here. Until now. She gulped once, tried to swallow her words, then lost her nerve. What do you want? This again, he laughed. I already told you. I want everything. Her brow furrowed. What's everything? Everything is, well, everything. That grin of his gained an rueful edge. All of it. I want to change the world. I want to live a happy life. And most of all, I want to find the bastards and monsters of this world and put them down like the dogs they are. Not you, of course. He amended with a rueful laugh when she tensed. I'm talking about the irredeemable, the villains, real nasty types who don't give a damn about anyone but themselves. You were picking pockets just to survive. I can sympathize with that. She almost couldn't believe what she was hearing. You can. Of course I can. Her savior sat up without warning, startling her terribly. I know what it's like to be an outcast. Something hardened in those silver eyes as he regarded her. To not be wanted, to be cast out, rejected by those who were supposed to protect you. Quick as can be, he leaned forward, reached across the space between them, and to her hands in his. You either die with dignity or live, by whatever means necessary. There's no shame in you. It did what you had to survive. You're not the villain here, Emerald. You never were. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. His words were a warm blanket, wrapping around Emerald's very soul. She hiccuped a little and sniffled despite herself. MK. There. Mercury took one hand from hers and patted her head. I meant what I said earlier. In the world I'm going to create, people like you will never go hungry again. And speaking of hungry, he released her and leaned back a bit, considering her. I don't suppose you'd know of any gangs in the area. Not really. She squirmed under his expectant stare. Slate's a small town. We have the Red Claws and the Dynamos, but they're small time. Nobody cares enough to deal with them. Why would they? You didn't survive on the outskirts by following the law. Small time, that got his attention. Any big fish? And nobody I know. She stammered out. Emerald. He sounded almost disappointed in her. It hurt more than words. Are you lying to me? No, never. And she wasn't. Her semblance allowed her to skirt most of the thugs in town, which she avoided like the plague. A memory struck her and she pounced on it. There was this big bastard, came through here a couple weeks back. She mimed a gesture with both hands, trying to recreate the shape she'd glimpsed from the shadows. Real big, built like a mountain, voice like gravel. He was looking for a woman. Nobody touched him, and nobody's seen him since. Mercury tutted once and leaned closer. One last thing. Guys, where can I buy a scroll? Emerald told him as best she could. He paused, considering her further. Do you have a favorite color? Honesty really was the best policy when dealing with someone like this. Green. Why? No reason. He rose from the bed with an impish smile and patted her head, idly mussing her hair. Wait here. I'll be back in a bit. Might even have a surprise for you. As Peace said, he paced to the door and summarily flung it open. A quick backward glance, then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. Emerald slumped down on her bed and took a deep, shuddering breath to compose herself. She felt as though she'd just passed a test. An important one. Loyalty always mattered. Mercury had given her food, offered her clean clothes, warmth and protection. She was loyal to him. Red eyes flicked to the bathroom. A shower really did sound nice right about now. It was surprisingly easy to obtain a scroll. Easy, but expensive, wretchedly so. Naruto sighed softly as he regarded his dwindling funds. Amber's money had come in clutch once more, but the lien she'd lent him wouldn't last much longer. Still, this was a purchase well made. Acquiring a phone was an essential step for his future agenda. On a whim he'd acquired one for Emerald as well. Yet another hit to his reserves, but also a worthwhile expense. He needed a reliable way to keep in touch with her, and besides, she would be grateful to have something to entertain herself going forward. Well, she did say she likes green. In the end he'd asked after the basic models, nothing fancy, just powerful to work in any kingdom. And well, that he did. Some of those newer models looked expensive. Way too many zeros at the end of those numbers. His silver tongue helped him haggle. After the shopkeep named his price, they spent the better part of an hour hashing out a deal. Once it was done, Naruto dutifully counted out the lien as the elderly man looked on. His finances had taken a significant hit today, but not a mortal one. Still, he'd need to find another way to earn lien, and soon. If things continued as they were, he'd be eaten out of house and home. He disliked the idea of sinking to petty theft, but no, there had to be limit. He couldn't go around fleecing civilians blind. That just didn't sit right with him, even here in his strange second life. He'd need to find an alternative source of income. What, then? The idea of working behind a desk was enough to drive him to distraction. He couldn't do it. He just couldn't. A bounty hunter, maybe he liked the sound of that. It would be something in the interim. My employer would be more than happy to reward you. That stripper's voice again. My name is Cinder. Scram already. I will not. She sounded almost offended. You took my semblance, killed me, and trapped me here. Did you really think I would go quietly? He scowled mentally at her. How did I even do that? I wasn't trying to. I do not know. A rare note of confusion threaded its way through her words. I don't feel quite like myself. Perhaps it's my ego. Perhaps I'm a figment of your imagination. Perhaps this is a mad fever dream and I'll soon be dead. That said, and he could just hear the sly smile in her voice, you did a fine job recruiting that girl. Emerald, was it? I couldn't have done better myself. She'll be a loyal pawn. I don't want your praise. Be quiet. Very well. I'll hold my tongue for now. Sir. Crap, the clerk was staring at him. He plastered a winning smile to his face. Sorry about that, I spacked it out. How much do I owe you again? He was just finishing up his purchase when he heard the door chime behind him. Naruto paid it little need, focused as he was on getting back to the hotel. He stayed focused on that right up until the shopkeeper froze. A faint click was his next warning, followed by a spike of killing intent snarling through his sixth sense. Really? Naruto set his hands down on the counter, lien momentarily forgotten. He heard footsteps shuffle in behind him. 1, 2, 3. No, surely not. His luck couldn't be that bad. Put it. Hands in the air, a gritty voice growled behind him. This is a robbery. Who was he kidding? Of course it was. Pivoting on one heel, he turned to face the speaker in question. Sure enough, he found himself looking upon an anxious young man with gun in hand, flanked by 2 cronies. 3 thugs altogether, each wearing face masks, hoodies, and an awful lot of gray. Even their jeans and shoes were an ugly shade of such. He immediately dubbed them gray, grayer, and grayest in order of said dull color. Really, he clicked his tongue at them, appalled by their behavior as much as his own rotten luck. This is a scroll store, not a dust shop. They don't keep any money here. Not him. He, the leader, twisted their pistol sideways, beady black eyes narrow in a vain attempt to intimidate him. Seen you roaming round town with your bitch, big spender. Hitting up the diner, the shops, then the hotel, and now this. Turn out your pockets if you know what's good for you. Oh, he tilted his head, mildly amused. Are you robbing me? The leader sputtered incoherently. What's it look like, dumbass? Like a massacre. Cinder's annoying voice purred in his head. Show them what it means to challenge you. Naruto ignored her, instead squinting at the leader, the one he'd casually dubbed Gray. He could see a faint blue sheen emanating round the young man's shoulders, more of a mist, really. No one else seemed to notice it. He waved a hand at the miasma, fingertips passing perilously close to the man's face. Sure enough, his hand passed right through the ethereal fog. The thug in question jerked back, fumbling with his gun. The hell you doing, man? Curious. There was no mist around his 2 compatriots, or the shopkeeper. None at all. He puzzled at it for a moment more before he finally grasped a glimmer of understanding. Could he see semblances now who had them, and who didn't? Fascinating. That was a useful ability. Just kill them. His brow twitched. I've had just about enough of you. Hush. Scowling, he mentally reached inside himself, found the presents, and squeezed. Cinder subsided with a pained cry for now. Say, from there, craned his neck back to the terrified clerk. Don't suppose there's a bounty on their heads? The man shook his balding head. Huawei, consider this a freebie, then. Gray sputtered at him. The hell do you mean? S-H-H-H-H. He pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. It'll all be over soon. An open palm touched Gray's chest, fingers splayed. The man made a noise of confusion, one that warped into an agonizing shriek as a massive lance of jagged black glass exploded through the wood robber's back in grisly relief. His companions recoiled with a shriek. Even as they did, Naruto hoisted him high, reached in, shunted the man's dying resistance aside, and took his gift for his own. His soul shifted as the new semblance took root deep inside him. Oh, he heard Cinder gasp in his head. That semblance feels rather nice. Naruto scoffed despite himself. Some semblance. It could barely be called one. He felt it shimmer to life in his chest and experienced a profound swell of disappointment once he realized what he'd grasped. Apparently this particular semblance granted its owner the ability to shoot sparks, that is to say an electrical current, from their fingertips. Hardly worth having, but once he trained it up, boosted it with chakra, maybe he could use it to shoot lightning at fools. Now there was an appealing thought. A bullet bounced harmlessly off his forehead and a frightened yelp drew him back to reality. Oh, right. He turned to face Gray's remaining companions, still quivering and covered in their friend's blood. Forgot about the two of you. Looming over them, he brandished his widest, toothiest grin, hopping to unman them entirely. Yet, they did not get. One opened fire on him, the others screamed profanities and rushed him, crowbar in hand. It made little difference. He raised his right hand and conjured his new semblance. Sorry about the mess. Some minutes later, he turned to face the dazed shopkeep with a bemused grin as their broken, charred bodies smoldered all over the floor. I still need to pay, don't I? Just let me get my wallet. Take them. The poor man all but shoved the scrolls into his hands. Just take them, they're already activated, I don't want any trouble. Trouble? His brow furrowed in concern. Now wait just a second. You've got it all wrong. The man frantically slapped something beneath his desk. Once, twice, thrice. He heard the answering wail of a siren in the distance and sighed. Bloody blasted panic button. He should have known better. Seemed his stay in Slate would be a brief one after all. 000. Time to go. Emerald jolted upright, towel fumbling from her hands as Mercury burst through the door. There was blood all over him, but he'd never been happier. No, he looked downright triumphant. She squinted at him. What did you do? Had a bit of an altercation, nothing major. Here. He threw a green scroll at her, forcing her to catch it, her damp hair forgotten. Don't suppose you know an easy way out of town? She fumbled with her scroll, with a fist hastily stowing it in her pocket. As she stood, he was clearly waiting for an answer. Thankfully she had won this time. Well, there's a train running in the depot, she hazarded. It passes through Forever Fall and a few more settlements. Sounds grand. He grabbed her hand and bolted for the door. We're hitching a ride. Amber's scroll beeped. Perhaps that wasn't the right word. It went absolutely berserk in her pocket, squawking and shrieking at her like some possessed grim. She jolted awake in the saddle and flailed for it, nearly falling off her horse and only narrowly managing to right herself at the last moment. Fumbling fingers pried it free. Golden eyes glared at it, not quite comprehending. A singular line of text awaited her within. Miss me. She shot back a quick text of her own, mildly confused. Who is this? A pause. And then, sorry, don't have a dear for you this time. Will a smile suffice? And she smiled. Hello yourself, Mercury. He'd kept his promise. A tear rolled out the corner of her eye. It had been so very long since someone kept their promise to her. Blake ran. Sometimes she felt that was all she was good for. Running, fleeing, escaping, anything that kept her safe. Don't like Mom and Dad, run away. Don't like the White Fang, run away. Don't want to face your painful past with the White Fang, run away. Run, 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 run away, run far, far away. She tried to run again today, and in doing so, keep Adam from doing something horrible. From detonating the bombs, killing all those people with the dust they'd taken. But it hadn't worked. It should have been simple. She'd thought it would be. Cut the cable connecting the cars and run like hell. She hadn't expected Adam to jump after her. In hindsight, she should have. He was furious. His bloody was up from all those mech he'd slaughtered, and she'd gotten in his way. Did you really think you could leave the White Fang? Leave me? Never, I won't allow it. I have to go my own way. She saw her face staring back at her from the edge of his blade, felt cold steel kiss her neck. He'd lost his mind. If you're not with me, he hissed, then you're against me, and if I can't of you. Adam's blade cut down at her. A shadow struck his side and kicked him away. Blake toppled to the side, clutching her throat. For crying out loud, an unfamiliar voice drawled in her still ringing ears. The one time I ride a train and someone tries to blow it up. Wilt whistled and at his head. It met a metal-shod shoe. Both slid back, boots biting into the train car. She had time enough to glimpse her savior's face, gray hair, eyes nearly gone silver, and whiskered cheeks dimpled in a smile. Then he was firmly between the two of them. There was a girl with him, and idly she took her in as well, noting green hair, red eyes, and dark skin, her face set in a thunderous scowl. Emerald, the unnamed boy directed, stay with the girl, would you? Understood, Mercury. Was that his name? Hey buddy. He turned a winning smile on the still recovering Adam. Mind explaining yourself now that the two of you are down with your lovers? Spat. Adam scoffed. I will not justify myself to you. Stand aside or die. Funny you should mention that. The boy Mercury cracked his neck. I've died before, so why don't we just sit down, talk this out? And clanged. Wilt scrapped off a metal vambrace, narrowly saving his arm. Adam pressed down on his blade, teeth bared in a snarl. You're a faunus, how could you work with them? Work for the schnee, is that what you think? He leered back at him. Sure, just profile me like that. Adam Taurus, right, the self-proclaimed assassin, considered him for a long moment, unfazed as he held his blade at bay. You know, my old man mentioned you once or twice. I'm afraid we're not the usual bargain basement schnee guards you've grown used to. The spinning kick rocked his head to the side, breaking the deadlock. Mercury lunged after him. You're playing with the big boys now. Die, traitor. Adam snarled and became a bloody blender of motion, wilt, and blush, carving a crimson swat before him. Mercury dodged it all. His grin grew with each near miss. He was poetry in motion, wind given form, always moving, ever in motion. You know, he laughed between blows, I always wanted to fight on a train. One more thing to put off my bucket list. Don't suppose you'd be willing to back down. Never. Violence it is, then RASENGAN. Adam howled in surprise as a snarling sphere slammed into his chest and smashed him down into a train car, leaving a gaping hole behind. He came tearing out of the pity a moment later, aura crackling, teeth bared in a furious snarl, semblance flaring. His blade met another metal-shod boot. They went mad from their blade, couldn't hope to follow half of its streaks of scarlet and silver, of black and white, of blood and pain. She wasn't sure how long it lasted. Seconds, minutes, it felt like an eternity watching them rage back and forth like lunatics. Something had to give sooner or later, surely. They couldn't keep this up forever, could they? Kick and parry, riposte and counter, lunge and stab. Mercury was a marvel of motion and Adam an angry avalanche. What happened when an unstoppable force met another unstoppable force? Blake didn't know. She was about to find out. Someone had to make a mistake sooner or later. Adam did. Spinning away from an axe kick, he thrust Wilt in Mercury's face. Rather than retreat, the lunatic actually grabbed it. Sparks sizzled up his arm and raced down the length of the blade, shocking him. Adam recoiled with an angry grunt, rubbing his numbed arm. More tricks. This is fun. Mercury kicked backwards and vaulted away, putting distance between them. His right hand rose, reaching toward the heavens. Emerald, stand back. Silvery eyes briefly gleamed golden, burning from within. Then the heavens rained glass. Jagged pillars of it, sharp enough, pierced steel wherever they went. Adam vaulted away from the one, swatted aside a second, only for the third to rake across his back and send him sprawling. The fourth found him as he rolled, followed by a fifth and a sixth. Aura crackled dully as he tumbled away, trying to shield his face with one arm. The moment he rose, a fist caught him in the jaw. Thought I couldn't use my hands, did you? Mercury weaved back from his counter and drove a punishing knee into his solar plexus. Too bad. Adam garbed angrily, clutching his jaw. Mercury grabbed him and shocked him again, driving him down to a knee. Blake recoiled for other reasons. Two semblances. That wasn't possible. It just wasn't possible. You could only have the one. As though sensing that very thought, Mercury moved in for the kill. Say, that's a nice semblance you got there. Adam balked. What? Mercury closed in. Grinning ear to ear, the assassin dodged a black of buckshot from Adam's shotgun sheath, stepped in and raked an open palm across his chest, fingers clenched into a cruel claw. Adam tried to twist away, for all the good it did him. Mercury simple adjusted his aim and struck down. Bits of his aura bled off at his touch, and for a moment, just a moment, Blake saw something come away with them. Something bright, a glowing sphere of raw red light. The assassin grasped it in his hand and absorbed it into his palm even as she looked on. Then it was gone. She blinked, wondering if she'd imagined it. Adam certainly hadn't, because he staggered. What have you done? Come and find out, horn boy. Impudent brat. Taurus closed with him in an instant. Blake noticed the difference straight away. He seemed slower somehow, more sluggish than before. By contrast, Mercury moved ever faster, weaving in and out of his path, delivering brutal blows that rocked her former flame from side to side. If Adam was a blender, this one was a hurricane. A massacre followed. Adam defended himself as best he could, but anyone could see he was outmatched. He was pummeled, bones broken. A fist slammed into Adam's shoulder at speed, nearly sending him spinning off the car and into the forest. He corrected himself at the last moment and countered with a slash, only for the assassin to smack it aside and retaliate with a devastating kick of his own. Naturally, he blocked with his blade and dropped to a knee, sheathing his blade to use his semblance again. Nothing happened. Mercury feed him a knuckle sandwich for his efforts. What is this? He recoiled, clutching his face. What did you do to me? I warned you. The assassin shrugged his shoulder, grinning ear to ear. You wouldn't listen. Now you'll pay the price for the rest of your life. What's yours is now mine. A cold nugget of coal coalesced in Blake's heart. Had he really just? No. Adam lurched at him, slashing wildly. No, give it back. I thin not. Mercury simultaneously broke his wrists and disarmed him with a sweeping kick. Wilt and Blush sailed through the air. He caught the former and thrust it into Adam's side, piercing his hip, drawing a furious snarl from him. With his free hand he caught of Adam's throat and slammed him down, forcing him to the ground. The train car dented painfully as he pressed him against the metal. You're beaten, he declared, all the mirth gone from his voice. No point in kicking a dog while he's down, and I don't need another voice in my head. Leave this place and I'll let you live. It seemed like he would, too. He took the blade from his throat and walked away, leaving him sprawled atop the train car. Blake froze, torn between fight or flight. Wait. Adam righted himself behind them, swaying dangerously. This isn't over. Emerald tutted softly. Yes, it is. Just stay down and you'll live. Though Adam was too crazed to hear her. He only had eyes for Mercury. Why spare me? Isn't obvious? Mercury looked back at him, a look of annoyance flashing across his face. You're weak. How could this happen to him? All his life he'd lived for vengeance, justice, retribution against the humans. To be battered about by a fellow faunus, to be broken, humiliated, and left alive at the end of it all, there could be no greater shame. Worse still, his semblance was gone. He was not so foolish as to think himself nothing without it, but it was a part of him, his fighting style, his very soul. It was, for all intensive purposes, him. Now that precious piece of him was gone, snatched away, never to be returned. And then his foe twisted the proverbial knife. Isn't obvious you're weak? His world went red. You're weak. It was the wrong thing to say. Blake knew at the moment it was said, just as she knew the reaction it would evoke. Adam twitched. Then he rushed him with a feral roar. Mercury tutted and turned to face the enraged swordman. Blade in hand. They never learn, do they? Blake saw it all unfold slowly. Oh, so slowly, all the colors of the world bleeding away to a sullen gray. Adam had lost himself to passion and charged him in the heat of the moment. No weapon, his aura lower, stamina and spirit shattered. It was foolish, reckless, the height of stupidity. There could be only one outcome. Blake saw it. Blake knew it. Blake tried to warn him. Too little, too late. Crunch. Adam blinked in surprise, staring down at the blade now jutting from his chest. No, Blake realized, blades. Mercury hadn't moved. The blades in her beloved's chest weren't red. Color rushed back as Emerald stepped out behind Adam, wicked sickles in hand. She could see the green blades buried in his back, jutting out his shoulder. For a moment, she wondered if he might live right up until Mercury stepped in and finished what his companion started. His borrowed blade pierced Adam's heart and burst out his back. Death was quick, nearly instantaneous. Adam had time enough to cough a weak, startled rattle of sound, to glare at her in spite, in utter hate. Damn you. Then he was gone, slumping against the assassin with a soft sigh. Mercury and Emerald gave him no respite. Together they kicked him off their blades and cast him away, hurling his body into forever fall. In a matter of moments he was gone, lost among the blurring trees. It was, in every way, an execution. Blake couldn't even bring herself to be angry about it, not after a fight like that. Maybe it was the shock, the numbness of watching a man she'd once loved die in cold blood. She was sure she'd feel it later, but right now, all she felt was numb. Adam had been given every opportunity to surrender, countless chances to retreat, and he'd wasted them all. He would have attacked her, or worse, she didn't even want to consider it. Mercury looked her way. Good job, Emerald. Thank you, sir. She preened beneath his gaze, cheeks flushing. You know, I always wanted a blade of my own. He sheathed Wilt with blush in a singular flourish and held the ladder at his side. This'll do. I'm sure he won't mind. Then he saw her. Blake stiffened beneath his gaze. Those cold, silver eyes stared right through her, piercing her very soul. Blake tensed, ready to flee at the slightest provocation, but she couldn't. The moment those silver eyes met hers, her knees locked up. She couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe, because she saw him. And he saw her. She also saw her. There was someone lurking behind Mercury, the spectral figure of a beautiful smirking woman clad in a red dress, her golden eyes narrow, dark hair framing her face in a bleak halo. For a moment she could have sworn she saw Adam standing beside her. She blinked and he was gone. Had she imagined it? Run away, kitten. The woman cooed at her. Unless you want to end up like me. A hand closed around Blake's face. Blake stiffened, ready for death. She felt something tug against her very soul. And then, just like that, Mercury let her go. Clone semblance. The madman muttered to himself as she tumbled back, gasping for air. Don't need that. Run along now if you don't want to fight. Hide in one of the back cars if you have to. Make something better of your life. So saying, he turned his back on her. If I catch you trying to blow up trains again, I won't. She babbled, half met with fear and grief and utter mind-numbing terror that she might be next to die. The blowing up part. Who are you? Nope. He smacked his lips. Learn my lesson from that. Run along now, kitty cat, and don't tell anyone what you saw here. Blake didn't need to be told twice. She bolted. Adam is dead. Sienna Khan took that bit news with all the fanfare it was due, which was to say none whatsoever. Is he now? She laid a fist against her chin and leaned upon it, the better to hide her smile as she looked down upon Corsac and Fennec from her throne. A shame. Pity the Albane brothers didn't feel the same. They looked downright aggrieved. Wounded, even. She wasn't surprised. Adam had been a useful pawn to them, an inspirational figure, one the organization rallied tone someone meant Corsa and Fennec intended to have usurp her in due time, no doubt. At the end of the day, they'd favored Taurus, not for his personality, but because Adam was strong, because Adam won victories, because Adam was a fiend, both against the SDC and their enemies at home and far afield. But their precious Adam wasn't winning anymore now, was he? Nope. He was moldering in forever fall somewhere, food for Grimm. So much for their grand rebellion. All those precious schemes were so much ash in their mouths. Good. She hoped they choked on them. And if they had a problem with that, too bad. Get mad. So very sad. The White Fang was hers. She'd wrested this useless band of misfits out from under Kali and Gira all those years ago and made them into what they were now. Something to be feared. And she'd be damned if some arrogant pup tried to take from her in turn. And now he never would. All to the good so far as she was concerned. Her rival was gone and there was no one with the wisdom or the wit to supplant her. Her reign was secure for years if not decades to come. If she ever found his killer, she'd give them a wet, sloppy kiss. Of course, she couldn't say or show any of her glee. Not outwardly. She led the White Fang, and as High Leader, everyone looked to her for guidance, now more than ever. He will be missed, of course. She feigned a sorrowed look that didn't quite reach her eyes. We'll hold a candlelight vigil in his honor. Fennec bowed his head. Indeed. Corsac kept his hands in his sleeves, mirroring his brother. May he rest in peace. Peace, sure. She would honor Adam today, and tonight, in the privacy of her chambers, she would laugh herself silly into her pillow. Rest in pieces, Adam. You won't be missed. She had warned the fool of a boy that targeting a SDC convoy and forever fall with anything less than 2 full squads was a bad idea. There was just too much that could go wrong with a raid like that in contested territory. The Schnee were upping their guards, the Grimm were unpredictable, and 2 people were simply not enough to subdue an entire train worth of dust and people. He should have waited for reinforcements. He hadn't listened, of course. He never did. Now he lay dead. Doubtless there would be a shift in the White Fang for days to come. Adam had been loved by the lower levels of the White Fang, the grunts, not the leadership. Not her. Oh, he was a capable commander in the field, make no mistake, but he'd been growing too big for his britches. She practiced targeted aggression. Adam favored mindless madness. He didn't care who he hurt these days, so long as they were human, and he brought vengeance to the faunus. Targeting SDC convoys was all well and good. Going after civilians, not so much. He was becoming a threat. In time he would have no doubt challenged her for leadership. Why, with his skill, he might have managed to kill her. And what of the Belladonna girl? Sienna blinked, drawn from her reverie. What about her? She dropped out of contact shortly after telling us of Adam's death. Corsac supplied. She did not tell us who killed him, only that someone did, and now she refuses to answer her scroll. Sienna leaped back into her throne with a sigh. Ah, little Blake. Always so quick to run from her problems. She'd been having doubts before the mission. No doubt she'd been spooked. It didn't matter. The White Fang had no need of weak-willed warriors like her. They were better off without her, and pursuing her would only invoke Gira's ire. Best to cut ties with her and let her be. Leave her. Sienna flicked a hand. She's of no use to us. If she wants to cut ties and run, then let her run. It's not as though she knows anything useful. No, her thoughts were with Adam, or rather, the lack of him. So far as she was concerned, whoever killed him had done her a favor. A mighty favor indeed. Sienna Khan paid her debts. Let none say otherwise. Covertly, of course. Wouldn't do to upset the rank and file. Why didn't you take her semblance? That was the question, wasn't it, Emerald? Naruto supposed he could have claimed Blake's semblance back on that train if he really felt like it, but he didn't. No, he didn't want it, nor did he need it. Hers was just a glorified substitution jutsu. And didn't that just speak volumes as to the nature of her soul? Hers allowed her to run away to escape while leaving a fake behind to take the hit for her. Why waste a semblance and aura when he could already do that without barely a thought? No, she would make better use of it than him. Would be given one chance to turn her life around. Just the one. A second chance. There would not be a third. And if she wasted that, well, he could always snatch her semblance and give it to someone else. Huh, now there was a thought. You're smiling again. The mighty glanced at Emerald, clasped both hands behind his back and kept walking. Oi, quit it. He heard her hasten after him through the tall grass. That's seriously a scary look for you. Come on, knock it off. They'd left the train and Blake behind and headed back into the wild shortly after leaving forever, although not without taking a few souvenirs. As of now, they had more than enough dust for the foreseeable future. Not like the SDC would miss it. He wondered if they'd notice a certain faunus stowaway. If they did, that wasn't his problem. That flighty cat girl would have to fend for herself in the future. All in all, he considered Forever Fall a successful venture. Now only had put a lunatic down and nicked a fair bit of dust, but he'd acquired a useful weapon and a powerful semblance at that. If it's power you're after, you could always pay the Shnees a visit. I've heard their semblance is hereditary and quite versatile. Cinder in his head again. She really knew how to sour his mood. If I see a Shnee I don't like, then I'll consider it. Were you talking to someone? No one you need concern yourself with. He waved Emerald's concerns away and held up his scroll. That it still had signal way out here spoke well to the CCT. According to the map, Ansel should be relatively close. We'll probably reach it before nightfall. Good. Her head bobbed. I'd rather not rough it. She paused a moment later, realizing what she'd just said and what it implied of him. I mean, he clicked his tongue at her and gave her a cross look. I've told you to speak your mind. You've slept outside before, I take it. One, when I pissed off a gang. She shrugged a shoulder, warily giving him her 2 cents. Wasn't fun. Naruto smiled, recalling his encounter with Amber. It has its own charms. By her expression, Emerald disagreed. I'll take your word for it. Whatever you say, city girl. A harsh crack pervaded the air, echoing in the distance before she could think toreply. He craned his neck toward. You hear that? Sounded like a gunshot. Emerald inhaled deeply through her nose, then scowled. Never mind the noise, do you smell that? He did, and he dearly wished he hadn't. It smelled like fire, ash, death. Cinder had gone strangely silent in his mind. 3 guesses why. First 2 don't count. Sure enough, he saw a black plume on the horizon, just over the nearest hill. He lengthened his stride and jogged up it, leaving Emerald to scurry after him. He found Ansel on the other side, a homely little village rimmed by a large, sturdy-looking wooden palisade ending in a large gate. One that even now creaked under the sheer weight of the monsters trying to batter their way through to the screaming folks' other side. For there were grim at the gates. He saw them from afar, a small pack of 12 assorted beasts hammering at the walls, fended off by a band of plucky pikemen standing atop them. Not a large group at all. For those on the walls it may well have been a swarm. As he looked on, an Ursa got a hold of one and managed to drag him down, a youth too either foolish or frightened to let go of his spear. Both boy and weapon pitched into the massive grim and vanished from sight. Someone cried out, Jaune. Naruto never knew who said the name. He'd already broke into a run the moment the boy went down. He heard Emerald shout behind him, but by then he was already pelting down the hill at full speed. He heard the boy scream and ran faster still. One hand gripped Blush, the other thumbed Wilt free from her sheath. She sang in his hand, eager for blood and battle. Could a sword be sentient? Nonsense. Not important right now. He hefted her like a spear, judged the distance, and left her fly with a cry. Wilt drilled the nearest Beowulf right between the eyes, nailing it to the wooden wall with an audible thunk. Its body slumped down and dissolved in so much smoke. 1 down, 11 to go. The remainder paused, briefly baffled by the abrupt death of their kin. They sensed the negative emotions he was bleeding and rounded on him. That was all the distraction he needed. Even as they turned to face him, he poured on one last burst of speed and leaped at them. Blush barked like the shotgun it was, blasting a hole through a Deathstalker's torso. 2 down. He was among them a heartbeat later, vaulting a Borbotusk before stomping down on its skull with both feet. His boots clicked and fire dust flashed forth, obliterating its skull and clearing a path in the same moment. Fur caught fire and every remaining Grim went mad, falling back to claw at themselves. A grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. 3 down. That left 9. Maybe less if the dust did its work. He could have continued the onslaught, but his last attack had gap opened in the pack and he saw his target. Remarkably, the boy was still alive. Bloodied, with a wicked gash across his forehead, but alive. He huddled behind a battered shield with both hands, clutching onto it for dear life. Well, it had been a shield once. It wasn't anymore. Grim claws and paws had rendered the poor thing so much scrap metal. Still, it had done its duty. He wouldn't be alive without it. Unbidden, he felt a flash of pride. Good lad, holding out this long. Ducking a Beowulf's frenzied paw, he grabbed the plucky survivor, a blond boy, by the scruff of his neck and heaved him upward. It's your lucky day, bub. Up you go. Startled blue eyes blinked back at him, framed by lank blonde hair. Wait, what? A quick jump brought him to Wilt, still buried in the gate. He hopped off it and alighted atop the wall, where 10 startled militiamen awaited him. He thrust the bleeding boy at them. Here you go. No point in waiting for their thanks. There was work to be done. He kicked back off the wall, snapped off a merry salute in midair, and crashed down among the Grim again like a meteor, leaving a crater in his wake. Yet another fell to his boots before the rest truly realized what was happening. 4 down, he ticked off in his head. 8 remained. A particularly large Ursa saw him coming and pivoted on its hind legs, braying a challenge. Slow, so very slow. It was the simplest thing to rip Wilt free from the wooden gate and place the blade directly in the beast's path. Gravity and momentum did the rest, letting him lopped off its paw at the elbow. The Grim balked at the ruined stump of its limb, not quite comprehending. Something ugly reared its head in Naruto heart, and with it came scorn. Pathetic. It yowled and swiped at him with its remaining limb. Fury lent him strength, and Naruto snarled back, caught the paw that swept in on the flat of the blade, and let momentum slam him backwards, boots biting into the grass as he skidded away. He dragged the blade back into its sheath as he went, clicking it shut. Aura swelled within him, shooting into his atoms his now buried blade. For a fleeting second, his silver hair flashed red. A wild grin tore across his face. Gotcha. Wilt tore free from her sheath with a wordless roar. Adam's semblance, already pent up for so long, didn't just flash forth. It erupted in a singular slash of death, a massive slice of energy that seared the world scarlet and scythed down everything before it, mowing down 5 more Grim and cutting a deep crescent in the dirt before finally fading. 3 remained. While he grinned at his smoldering blade. That settles it, I'm keeping you. A brutish Barangel pounced at him. Without looking back, he ducked low, hewed its legs out from under it, then drove his sword through its chest. 2 left. It was surprisingly easy to use Adam's sword. Not effortless, he had to work at it, but it was easier than he thought, and became easier still the longer he fought. Had he taken the man's muscle memory alongside his semblance, or was there something more sinister at work? There was no second voice in his head yet, and he could only assume Cinder was being silent for her own reasons. You assume correctly. GRR, just when he'd thought himself rid of her. But at least he didn't have a brash bull in his brain. That was Adam's cue, if he was still around in some shape or form. Nothing. But the anger persisted. Was that a good thing? He wheeled his left leg back and blocked a paw while striking out with Wilt. Blush barked, spraying shotgun shells, forcing it back. The whistle of a sickle and the sharp crack of a chain heralded Emerald's arrival into the fray. Another Barangel toppled to the dirt behind, tongue nailed to the roof of its mouth and 2 hooked blades through its brain. His partner tumbled off its back, eyes wide and chest heaving. She'd never fought Grim before, he could see in the panic on her face, but she had aura alongside her semblance and had acquitted herself reasonably well just now. She met his eyes and dared a tremulous nod. Between the 2 of them, the last living Grim, a Beowulf, didn't stand a chance. Together, they fell upon it and cut it apart. The beast died screaming. It was easy to be confident when you had someone to watch your back. Killing monsters together felt pretty damn good, all things considered. In short order, the last of them lay dead and dissolving at their feet. Mission accomplished. Not bad. He gave Emerald's shoulder a brisk pat. You did well, and you threw yourself at them. I did. Not sorry. Iawug, forget it. She shook herself and sheathed her weapons, trembling a little. That was a lot. Why were they here? Negativity attracts Grim. He looked past fading Grim to the village of Ansel. Whole bunch of them. Which means, he looked to the gate. There's probably a story to this. Together, they approached the battered gate. He heard a commotion, and in no time at all, an old man's weathered visage leaned over the wall. He glimpsed a balding head of silvery hair and brown eyes, a scarred visage set in the scowl, lips puckered in distaste. For all that they'd saved him and the others, he didn't look much pleased for it. Who goes there? He spoke with a faint twang in his voice, an audible accent he couldn't quite place. The you bandits. Naruto exchanged a wry glance with Emerald and looked back. Would bandits knock on the gate or save one of your own? The man winced, but clung to his pride. Aye, they would. They're a right sneaky sort. He laughed a little. We're not bandits. And you are. Name Samuel. I lead this lot. Hunters then, or ye got your licenses and everything? Not at all, but well, better a white lie than a painful truth. We're still in training. Can you fight? Emerald tutted. Better than you. He quelled Emerald with a glower. We can. Something softened in that craggy visage. Then you're welcome to our village if you mind your manners. Best be careful, though. There's a witch hereabouts. A witch now. It was his turn to scoff. Let me guess, does she have green skin and a pointy black hat? Nay, she's a demon with a red blade, skin white as snow with hair dark as night and eyes the color of blood. But didn't you just call her a witch? A demon, I say, the man ranted, shouting them down. She's hit villages nearby with her men. Proper bitch, too. Always picking fights and doesn't give a flying fig for who she hurts or what she takes. He quirked a brow at him. Something didn't add up here. But not you. The elder shook his spear down at them. Why do you think we had this many? Grim. Half of us want to leave. The other half think we'll be next. He seemed to chew on the words a moment more. Someone nudged him and he heaved a sigh. Look, lad, there's a standing bounty on Grim in these parts. It's not much, but keep it. Naruto waved him off. We didn't save this village for the money. Emerald whispered in his ear, low enough for only him to hear. We need Lian, and we'll get it. But these people have even less than we do. We do not take from the poor. Was that a glimmer of respect in her eyes just now? Whatever it was gone just as quickly. Anyone else would have thought their mind was playing tricks on them. Not him, Samuel hollered, breaking his concentration. Are ye coming in or not be in or be off with ye? He held up a hand. Just a moment. Emerald was waiting for him when he turned to face her. We're going to help these people, aren't we? Maybe. Her scowl redoubled still. They're hiding something. I know they are. But what choice do we have? Best give Amber a call. Then they could get themselves settled and figure out what the devil was going on here. Her scroll was banging off again. Amber almost didn't hear at first, so lost was she in her nightmares. But it kept bleeding at her, incessantly, until at last she creaked a sleep-gummed eye open and flailed for it. Her hand scrambled out of the blankets and pawed at empty air, reaching. Gravity betrayed her as she reached just a tad too far. Thump. Oh. The floor was cruel and cold and wooden, something Amber hadn't much minded before when she was awake, but very much did now that she found her face squashed against it. Oh, her poor head felt like someone had kicked her skull clean open. An angry growl grumbled against the ground as her eyes briefly flickered with maiden fire. Blasted in. Her cot was way too small for her liking, but it was all she could afford with what little Lian she had left. Still, she was grateful to be awake. If nothing else, the noise had freed from dreadful dreams. She'd died again, trapped in that terrible, cold metal tube, banging at the glass. It was almost always the same. She always dreamed of in the tube. Every time. Without fail. Sometimes she suffocated to death. Sometimes an arrow pierced her heart. Sometimes the tube turned on, sucked out her very soul. And sometimes they just left her in there to die alone, wasting away as time dragged on. That was always the worst. Screaming and pounding at the glass, unable to be seen, unable to be heard. Unable to die, but unable to live, either. She'd had one good dream, just the one, when she'd shared that campsite with Mercury. A reprieve. The nightmares had come every night since. Her scroll bleated once more, demanding her attention. Shivering a little, Amber sat up on her knees, snatched it up, keyed in her password, and took a look. Her eyes lit up as saw the Cinder. Mercury. In an instant she was awake, fumbling for the screen. Her brow furrowed. Let's see here, Ansel Bandit, what has he gotten himself mixed up in? Well, that settled it. She'd help him. He was what a friend. She had so few of those left now. She'd thought Ospin was her friend, that Kuro and Glinda were her friends, but they weren't now, were they? They wanted to contain her, control her, keep her not in a cage. They weren't that bad, but they wouldn't let her leave Vale or that awful mansion. She was a huntress, damn it. She was meant to be free. If she'd known the burdens, the perils, the pain she would suffer, she never would have accepted this power. Some days she wished someone would just take it away. But that was childish thinking, even for her. She knew that. She was stuck with this power, until death did them part. Mercury, now he was free. No one could chain him down. He'd kill anyone who tried. She didn't know what she felt about him. He was witty, sarcastic, and not at all afraid to talk back when need be. Regardless, he'd lit a fire in her, reignited something deep inside, a feeling she'd lost long ago. There had never been time for anything like this, not since she inherited this power. It was always training, or hiding, or meetings with Ospin. Always what was best for them, for the world, never for her. Never what she wanted, not once. But back to this feeling, it felt like warm butterflies in her chest, sunlight on her face, the frantic pounding of her own heart. Could it be? Amber clapped both hands to her cheeks and shook her head. No, bad girl, calm down. Girl, it was too soon for that. Way too soon. Wasn't it? Her gaze flitted back to her scroll, reading the messages therein. Ansel, that was a few days away, wasn't it? Less if she flew. With luck, she could make it there quickly. She would. She wanted to see him again. She must, if only to put these dreams to rest. Ansel rolled out the red carpet for them. Well, inasmuch as a small village on the edge of the frontier could roll out the carpet. Naruto appreciated the hospitality, rustic as it was really, he did, but he knew it came with a caveat. He and Emerald were each given free room and board at the inn, while drinks at the local tavern were summarily declared to be on the house. Better yet, the innkeeper was so delighted to put up 2 hunters passing through at little cost to them, so long as they lent a hand keeping an eye out for more grim. An easy bargain. This place was full of retired huntsmen and their families, warriors past their prime or those too young to make a meaningful difference. They had received more than a few kindly nods from the former and odd looks from the latter. On the surface it sounded simple, all they had to do was face these bandits if they did indeed exist, and send them packing. And yet he couldn't help but feel that there was more at work here. Or was there? If these fools cannot fend for themselves, then what point is there? Leave it to Cinder, the proverbial devil on his shoulder, to pour poison in his ear. Devil indeed, I'll have you know I'm a well-adjusted member of society. You tried to recruit me while my house was on fire. Semantics. He shook his head to shut her out. Ansel was riled up, there could be no denying that, but were bandits to blame? The Grim would say yes. They'd been drawn here by the sheer negativity of good folk fearing for their lives. But was there something more sinister at work here? Emerald seemed to think so. Then again, she could be frightfully paranoid. It had taken no small amount of work and spoiling on his part to earn her trust, and even then it was a fragile, fledgling thing. She wouldn't put her faith in others just yet. It fell to him to be the voice of reason here, both for the village and her. But they couldn't stay here. They absolutely could not stay here. They'd get bogged down and never leave. Yet neither could he leave these people to their fates. If their lives really depended on him, if there really were bandits, if there was some unknown danger, too many ifs. One is Spar. Naruto blinked, drawn out of his maudlin reverie. Pardon, Spar. Emerald stared back at him, her plate pristine clean. He hadn't even touched his and it showed. You look tense. And I need, she swallowed once to master herself. I need to practice. The last bit was said just a touch too quickly. She must have been unnerved by all this, too. Or mad by it was the Grim, who could say regardless, he took her off in the spirit it was given. He stood, knocked back the plate, and scarfed his dinner down. Sounds like a plan. A shadow watched them from afar. Hunters. Actual, real, live hunters here in Ansel. They seemed like good people. Maybe they could help. Emerald knew her way around a brawl. She fought not like a huntress but like a survivor. Rough and tumble, no holds barred, doing whatever it took to win. She had been born and raised on the streets and it showed. Wasn't afraid to fight dirty either. The girl was all elbows and knees and not at all afraid to use them when he disarmed her. Which was often. Most of her style, if one could call it such, was clearly self-taught and she fought solely by instinct. Here, at least, Marcus' training came in clutch. He could see those mistakes in them, correct her stance and adjust accordingly. They'd found nice, isolated little patch of dirt behind the tavern to do just that in. Ruh. Naruto opened his eyes and swayed backward, grinning from ear to ear as her heel passed mere inches from his face. He caught her ankle and sent her spinning away. She didn't fall. Instead she whirled with it, letting momentum drag her chain sickles and at his forehead with blistering speed. Wilt stabbed down, entrapping one, even as he caught the other and reeled her in like a fish. She realized what was about to happen, locked eyes with him, and used her semblance. Quite suddenly he found himself face 3 of her. Points for her. He'd told her to use it sparingly where need be, and she had. But hallucination or no, he could sense her all the same. His fist found her stomach and she folded like so much wet paper. He expected a complaint, pain at the very least. Instead she accepted the blow, dropped to her knees and clutched her gut, all with nary a noise. He knelt to check her, to make sure she was all right. And she swept his legs. Naruto pitched backward with a squawk. It was his own fault, really. He'd let his guard down, pity and concern getting the better of him once yet again. Emerald took full advantage and tackled him, driving him down to the ground, practically straddling him. She planted her legs on either side of him and shoved a sickle under his throat. Yield. There were a dozen different ways he could have slipped free. He chose not to. Grinning, he raised his hands. All right, I give. You gonna get off me now unless you're into that sort of thing. Emerald looked down. Her face went red. She tackled him. A rustle in the bushes commanded his attention. Emerald tumbled off him and rounded on it, weapons raised. Who's there? Whoa, a boy emerged from the brush, hands up. Don't shoot, I come in peace. Naruto climbed to his feet and assessed the newcomer in an instant. Blonde hair, blue eyes, thin, scraggly, no aura, ripped blue jeans and a dark hoodie. Was thought a rabbit on it, he couldn't quite tell by the crude armor the boy wore. For it was crude, make no mistake, blasted thing barely covered his chest and shoulders. How was that supposed to protect him and why did he look so familiar? Emerald hissed. You'll leave in pieces. He should have known this would attract attention. Belatedly, he recognized him. I remember you. You're the one I plucked out of the Grim yesterday. His mind flailed, struggling to recall his name. Jaune, right. Yeah, the scraggly boy flushed and looked away. That'd be me. Silence reigned supreme. Emerald didn't lower her thief's respite. Naruto laid a hand on the barrels and forced it down. Did you want something? I wanted to ask. Jaune studied his shoes as though they were made of gold. Are you 2 huntsmen? His lack of courage was beginning to rankle him. Where was the spirit he'd shown yesterday? Where was the fire? Why say that? Jaune kicked at the ground. You look like huntsmen. We're only a little older than you, idiot. Emerald. She subsided with a sigh. We've been training. There's a difference. Jaune perked up, hope in his eyes. Did you attend signal? Emerald tilted her head with scorn. Did you? Nah, but I want to be huntsman. Huntsmen are fools. Jaune winced, but rallied in the face of her ire. And no, they aren't their heroes. She scoffed. Heroes die all the time. We're not heroes. Naruto's conscience gave him a nudge. I want to be somebody. Jaune wouldn't back down if anything. Emerald's insult only seemed to embolden him. I'm sick of this place, and sick of my sisters. I want to help people, save people, the same way you saved me back there. He saw their deadpan expressions and faltered at last. I know, I'm weak. I would have been dead without you. You are weak. The nudge became a poke. Naruto sighed. How many sisters you have? 7. The poke became a stab. He would have killed for a mentor in his first life. Granted, he'd gotten several eventually, but this boy clearly hadn't. It might be too late for this boy to make beacon in a few years. Boot. What are you asking of us? He sheathed Wilt with a sigh. Training? Do you have aura, at least? Jaune looked like he might lie for a moment, then thought better of it. No, of course not. Are either of your parents huntsmen? Dad is. No hesitation this time. Good, good. And where is this father of yours? Out on a mission. Emerald saw the angle he was taking and backed him up. Why hasn't he unlocked your aura? It's not hard. Jaune wilted a little under their gaze. He doesn't think I'm serious about this. Emerald shook her head, hair swaying. You clearly aren't. But I might have armor. And a weapon. Emerald didn't say anything to Jaune. She didn't have to. Instead she pivoted and looked at him. Naruto could feel her stare. You helped me, her gaze seemed to say. Are you going to help every stray we stumble across? No, he wasn't, but surely. Damn him for being a softy. A muscle jumped in his jaw. 7 in the morning. Emerald sputtered. Excuse me. Jaune faltered. Come again. Be here at 7 tomorrow morning. Sharp, he stabbed a finger into the younger boy's armored chest. And eat a light breakfast. But first come here. Jaune scrambled closer, practically tripping over himself. Cinder scoffed in his head, coddling the weak. Hush. He laid a hand on the boy's head and closed his eyes. The words came with surprising ease. For it is in our weakest moments that we find our strength. Through this we become a bulwark against the darkness, a defender of the weak and forgotten, the powerless and misbegotten. Unbound by morality and driven by ambition, I release your soul, and by my shoulder support thee. Jaune jolted in his grasp with a gasp, and he felt the aura surge out of him. There. He stepped back, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. I've unlocked your aura. You have quite a lot. Remember, 7 tomorrow. Don't make me regret this. Jaune bowed. Not good enough. Am I understood, soldier? The boy saluted instead. Sir, yes, sir. He didn't fail to notice Emerald's jealous glare. What was Mercury playing at? Emerald couldn't understand. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Ansel had no strategic value. Their supplies were meager, and they had little in the way of warriors. So why linger here? Why unlock a civilian's aura and teach him basic swordplay? It all smacked of kindness and mercy, which was nice and all, but it wasn't getting him anywhere. Their funds were still dwindling. They'd need to move on. Instead, here they were, settling in for the night at this blasted inn when they should be leaving. He made no mention of either as they went to their cots. Finally, it was too much. She couldn't take it anymore. Why are you helping him? Ah, dear Emerald. Mercury threw himself back on the bed with a languid sigh. So full of questions. I like that. She squinted at him. What was this? Some sort of trick you do? Sure. He shrugged his shoulder. You keep me honest. She arched a green eyebrow. Well, most honest. He amended, clasping both hands behind his head. Her brow climbed higher. Okay. He granted her a Cheshire sea grin. Relatively honest. To answer your question, I helped Jaune because he reminds me of, well, me, when I was younger. Kids got moxie. Are you saying you were weak? The weakest. There was a telltale twinkle in his eye as he winked her way. Hard to believe, eh? It was very much so. Mercury had never been weak. She refused to believe it. She absolutely refused. No way in hell. He'll never make it to Beacon. He might, her partner disagreed. I've given him a good start. He can build off it once we put Ansel behind us. Something about those words lit the spark of hope in her. So we're not staying here forever. He nodded curtly. We're not by any means. Then what are we waiting for? A finger rose. Who, actually? I don't get it. A friend, if she's willing to meet up with us. She might not. She's not a fan of civilization, never mind the big cities. Vale. He had plans for Vale. That's where we're going, then. In due time. Uncertainty nagged at her anew, gnawing her nerves. She didn't want to appear weak before him anything but that, yet he'd mentioned someone else. It rankled her more than she cared to admit. You didn't tell me you had a friend. I met her before you. He held up a hand, sparks sizzling within, then raised another, crackling with shards of molten glass. It was right after I killed my dad and an annoying broad. His casual admittance of murder would have appalled anyone else. Not her. Mercury didn't kill without good reason. Don't worry, she's good people. Emerald twitched. She, was that whom he'd texted earlier? Was she not special after all? Though she was. With that thought, a seed of jealousy planted itself in her chest. But enough about her. Mercury stifled the two semblances in his hands and rolled over onto his stomach to look at her. Where do you want to go? Emerald froze up. She still wasn't used to anyone asking what she wanted. We can see the sights, travel the world, cause chaos. Why do you say? Traveling the world sounds nice. She swallowed once to master herself, then barreled on before she could lose her nerve. This friend of yours, what does she look like? Tall, tan, with short brown hair. There was something in his face as he said it. Emerald looked up from her lap. You. She curled one finger around her pale tresses, like girls with long hair. Mercury blinked at that, just a little too quickly. By contrast, his reply took several seconds. I do. Oh, that was good to know. Maybe she shouldn't cut her hair after all. Mercury squinted at her, noticing the spark in her eyes. Why did you ask? Was curious. No way was she telling him about that. Not yet. He sighed and flopped off the bed. All right. G-Night, Emerald. I'll take first watch. Good night, sir. I told you to call me by my name. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. I'll think about it, sir. She waited until he'd closed the door, until his footsteps had receded, until he was well and truly gone. And then, her head hit the pillow, narrowly muffling a happy squeal. Jaune had spirit. He was untapped, untrained, almost utterly unremarkable in almost every way, but he wouldn't give up, he wouldn't stay down, and he just would not quit. No matter how hard he hit him, no matter how many times he knocked him down and out, he always found a way back to his feet. Was it wrong that Naruto took some pride in that? Probably. He still kept pushing him regardless. So it passed 2 days. In many ways the boy reminded him of himself back in his first life. Little skill, little training, little in the way of common sense, but determined to prove himself, refusing to give up. His attitude and confidence needed much work, but those would come with time and skill. They could fix that. Wrong wilt diverted Crocea Moors with ease, sending Jaune stumbling past. The younger boy swiped at him as he went. A stray strand of silver hair fluttered by. Naruto raised his somewhat marginal opinion of the boy by 1 notch. Good. In the beginning, he wouldn't have thought to do that. He whirled and drove a metal-shod boot into the boy's back, tossing him into the dirt. Don't swing with all your strength. He barked at him. Move with the weight of your blade. Let it guide you. Blush barked dust and was summarily tanked by the younger boy's aura. Better. But then the boy sagged and his face grew stormy. No. He dragged him back to his feet and gave him a shake. Don't give up. You don't get to give up. Never give up. That's your defining trait, Jaune. When the boy made to speak, he shook him again. If you want something, you have to fight for it. Don't sit there and mope. You have 2 years till B can use them. The boy drooped in his grasp. But this is harder than I thought. If the next words out of your mouth are I can't, I will smack you, I swear on my sword. He felt a dark ripple of approval in that instant. Where had that come from? Shaking it off, he fixed his would-be pupil with a baleful look. Listen to me, Jaune. He took the boy by the shoulders, frog-marked him over to a nearby stump and sat him down. Because I'm only going to say this once. You're blind to what true power can bring you. He slung an arm around his shoulder, holding him close. I'm going to let you in on a very important secret, one I learned when I was younger than you are now. You see, power, real power, doesn't come to those who were born strongest, or fastest, or smartest. No, it comes to those who would do anything to achieve it. But I'm so far behind. Fool of a boy. Fine. Being calm clearly wasn't working. Time to appeal to his emotions. He mastered his temper and gave him another shake. Look at you, struggling to have everything you want, all while the world tries to make you choose. Good, evil, hero, villain, light, dark. Choose, they say choose. He snarled the younger boy into silence. Pick one or the another, but not both. Oh no, never both. Real power means you don't have to choose. Be who you want to be, and so will I. He let him go, stepped back, and assumed a ready stance. What do you want to be, Jaune? The boy stood, picked up his sword, and readied his battered shield. Naruto grinned. It was not a nice smile. Now try to hit me. The bandits came the next morning. They found one man waiting before the gates of Anel. Sitting, really, right out there in the open without a care in the world. 50 they were, but even they paused in the face of such an unusual sight. Just as planned. There you are. Naruto stifled a yawn and rose, propping himself up on his sword. Kept me waiting. One of the bandits stepped forward, an ugly balding brute with a scar over his right eye. Where is she? Give her to us, or we'll burn this place down. He frowned. Where is who? One brandished a hatchet at him. Don't play dumb. Where's the maiden? He felt Cinder perk up in his soul. He could almost imagine her slow, sinister smile. Oh, what's this? Naruto tilted his head. Maiden? I don't know any maiden. I don't even know what that is, for crying out loud. Why are you after her? That bitch pissed off the boss. Weapons waved his way, battered and worn. We had to trek all the way from Mistral to get here. Now give her up. Really? He thumbed wilt free from her sheath, revealing a gleam of scarlet metal. If she's the boss of you lot, then I pity you. Why, you little. In every group there was always an idiot, some blithering bonehead who was either too strong or too dumb to take a hint. Evidently this little tribe had the latter. One rushed him now, hatchets in hand, howling like a lunatic, a mad bull charging. Anger reared its ugly head in his heart once more, but this time he was ready for it. He channeled it, focused it, mastered it. That's not a sword, he tutted softly. No. Will flicked forth from her sheath, quick as lightning, then slid back and thrice as quickly. Behind him, the man fell apart, his body cleaved in twine at the waist. This is a sword. One of the bandits cried out in a high, reedy wail. He killed Bert. Get him, get. Blush barked and the speaker went down with a faceful of dust. You know what? Wilt scraped free from her sheath. Fine, come and die. It was too much to hope they would listen. They rushed him, again, as planned. Looky here. He reached into his belt pouch and withdrew an item. I've got a jar of dirt. Care to guess what's inside it? He superheated it in his palm and flung it at them before they could guess. I'll give you a hint. Thoom. Cinder's semblance flared in the jar, or rather the molten dirt within went off like a hand grenade. Shrapnel sprayed in every direction, some of it even skittered off his aura. The bandits weren't so lucky. 12 of them died outright, 6 more dropped screaming, and 3 more were stunned. The rest couldn't see the forest for the trees, but Emerald could have been from this distance. One bandit dropped to the ground, screaming, clawing at their face. He ran them though. Another crashed to their knees, gibbering about snakes. He lopped off their head with a lazy backswing. He was sure she and everyone in Ansel were watching from the walls. She would play the silent support, letting him tear through the bandits. Let him be the one to fight. Let him give them the hope they craved. If any tried to get past him, they'd be trapped in their worst nightmares. And yet it didn't seem they were. They were too focused on him, to the exclusion of all else. He lobbed another jar of dirt their way, and even more fell back into the smoke. What was this? How could anyone be afraid of this lot? He was picking them apart, and he was just one man. There had to be more than this. There just had to. Enough, a new voice barked, souring his good mood. Useless idiots, the lot of you back up. A woman strode through the smoke, clad in red and black, her hair dark as night. He couldn't see her face behind a redon white mask. White fang? No, not quite. He could sense the aura within her, and deeper within, the telltale flicker of a semblance. Curiosity had him tilting his head. I'm guessing you're the witch. She planted a fist on her hip. Excuse me. No. He wagged a finger her way. I'm not talking to you while you're wearing that. His voice lowered further, not unlike a parent speaking to an unruly child. That's precisely what she was to him. Take that ridiculous thing off, then we can speak. Fine. An annoyed sigh issued forth from the confines of the helm. There's no point in hiding it now, I suppose. Remarkably, she complied and cast it aside. Eyes red as blood were, skin white as snow, hair black as night. She might have been beautiful if weren't for her scowl and the lines in her face. She looked tired, worn, exhausted and angry. Dirty, too, like she hadn't had a proper bath in days. Did it have something to do with that maiden they were on about? Cinder was curiously silent in his head. I am Raven Branwen, leader of the Branwen tribe. The Bandit Queen drew her blade with a flourish, its crimson edge glinting in the sunlight. You have 2 choices before you, huntsman. Stand aside and give me what I want, or die screaming. Good for you. Naruto crossed both arms before his chest. I choose the third option, the one where I kick your head in. Throaty laughter was his reward. You think you're a hero? Boy, her full lips pursed in a scowl. Your morals, your code, it's all a sick joke. These people you're protecting, she raised a hand, indicating the walls of Ansel behind him. When the chips are down, your so-called friends over there, they'll eat each other. Just like we're about to dodo you. She lunged. Wilt met her halfway. Scarlet steel sparked against red. His boots bit back into the grass, tearing a furrow into the earth. She leered at him over their crossed blades, bearing him down. You know how to use that thing, kid? Funny, I should say the same to you. His hair flashed riotred as Adam's semblance took hold. Thanks for getting real close, though. Her eyes bulged. Raven flung herself backward, braving her blade with both hands to defend herself. Too late. Wilt yowled. A swat of red dead struck her head on, slammed into her torso, barreled her back into a tree, and beyond. She kept going, vanishing into the woods with an awful crackle of sundered timber. What a joke. Why did I ever think this was a threat to me? When she didn't emerge, Naruto turned his eyes on the remaining bandits. Of what was once 50, less than half remained. Ordinarily I'd let you guys off with a beating, but this ain't ordinary. Sorry. He granted them a grim look. I'm fresh out of mercy. You've made a life of harming people. Now I may harm you. He stabbed Wilt down, conjured a pair of racing shuriken to his hands, let them fly, and closed his heart to what followed. When the blood was done flying and the screams dying, he waded in. What followed was not a massacre. Massacres implied effort. He fell upon them, sword swinging. It was a slaughter. By the time Raven re-emerged from the thicket, it was to see the last of her men cut down by his bloody hands. He lopped off the last survivor's head and kicked it her way, sending it tumbling down to her feet. She balked at him with wide eyes. No bravado now. All he saw was surprise, shock, and a touch of, oh yes, there it was, fear. He could see the ugly wound in her left shoulder, the way she favored her right leg. Despite that, she still held her blade tight and glared at him. You, me. He swept his blade to the side, splashing blood onto the grass. Look at you. Not so tough now, are you? He felt her anxiety. It warmed something in him, something ugly. Hate, spite, wrath. Yes, show her. Do it now. A furiously familiar voice hissed in his head, snarling over the pounding in his ears. It didn't sound like Cinder. Tell her, let her know what it's like to be weak, to be powerless, to be nothing. Something was bleeding over into his thoughts. For once, he agreed with it. Okay, honestly, you're a joke, he spat at her. You wanna rob this village like very other, but you don't want things to change. His sword flicked out, lazily sheathed once more. You want everything to stay the same, maintain the status quo, the strong ruling over the weak. How messed up is that? Tell me, how the hell is humanity supposed to change if it's not allowed to evolve? She tensed, expecting an attack. And he would just not in the way she expected. Tell me, now what did you call me? My morals, my code? Oh, I remember now, a bad joke. He grit his teeth behind his lips and started forward, throwing his words back in her face. Dropped at the first sign of trouble. You think I'm only as good as I believe myself to be. You'll see. But right now, I'm not feeling very good. Another step, now, nearly within striking distance. You think you can just take whatever you want, whenever you want, human. Even swamped by anger, he noticed the word human. Why was he calling her human? But you can't. He glared at her, teeth bared in a snarl. Because as long as there are those who remember what was, there will always be those that are unable to accept what can be. What needs to be. What must be. Raven skittered backwards. Stay back. See, now you respect me because I'm a threat. He drew Adam's blade again, charged with kinetic energy, and pointed it at her. That's the way it works. You see, I know what it's like to lose. To feel so desperately that you're rightly to come up short. Her face twisted helplessly as he looked on. There it is. He tapped his cheek with one finger. That's the look. I enjoy that look of confusion when an inferior being meets a higher power. It's intoxicating, wouldn't you agree? She didn't answer. Of course not. Cravens were all bluster and no bite. What's wrong? He spread his arms wide. You were laughing before, but you're not laughing now. Raven took a step back. He stalked after her. Going to run away? Coward. The word made her flinch for some reason. Coward. Coward. He all but spat the word, pressing the advantage. That's exactly what you are. Attacking the weak, the helpless, all those who can't fight back. But the second someone like me comes around, you up and fold like a house of cards. His lips curled in a sardonic, spiteful sneer. You're worse than my old man. At least he died with a semblance of dignity. Well, somewhat. Oh, well. He charged forward. The second he did, Raven cut a tear in the air, birthing a red portal between her and him. He had to twist aside to avoid rushing headlong into it. The sudden stop sent him skidding across the grass, tearing a fresh furrow into the dirt. He didn't miss her irked oath. Clever. She'd almost had him there. Portals. He eyed the swirling vortex warily. Is that your semblance suits a coward like you? Coward. 3 times now. He'd called her a coward 3 times. Naturally, he had no way of knowing the switch he'd just flipped. And he never would. Raven absolutely twitched. Hatred sparked in her eyes. She cut the portal and rushed him with a yowl. I quote him no coward. There was grace even in her rage, fire in her fury, strength in her savagery. It didn't save her. He parried her first strike with blush, evaded the second, slapped aside the third with wilt, stepped aside from the fourth, and opened his arms wide for the fifth. Her blade slammed down on his chest and shattered, leaving her clutching a useless hilt. She balked at it, taking her eyes off him for a crucial second. Foolish. He placed blush against her stomach, closed his eyes, unloaded. Her body bucked as buckshot plowed into her stomach. Naruto squeezed the trigger and fired twice. Thrice now. Raven's overtaxed aura shattered at last. Triumph blazed in his chest, emerging as a growl. Remember what I promised you. He chambered a leg over Raven's head, held it there a moment more. Her head snapped up a heartbeat too late. His boot swung down and his heel came alongside it, crashing down into her skull, burying itself there. Right between her wide eyes. Blood sluiced down her forehead and ran out her nose. What are you? Entirely done with your shit is what I am. He tore his heel free from her skull, leaving her to reel helplessly placed like a drunkard at last call. Alive or die, I don't care. Raven didn't even seem to hear him. She reached up past him with blank eyes, to something only she could see. Young, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He shoved her. She slumped sideways and fell at his feet, eyes rolling back in her head. Naruto tutted angrily. Who or what was a yawn? Meh, probably not important. He slammed his hand down on Raven's unconscious visage and squeezed. Her aura lay in ruins. There was no resistance. She was too busy bleeding out at his feet. Her semblance barely put up a fight. So much for the Bandit Queen. She was either dead, dying, or very close to it. He paid her no mind, found what he was looking for in her soul, and yanked. With that felt something slide into his soul and something clicked in the back of his head, bringing with it understanding. Scarlet sparks crackled across his aura, his eyes glowed, and just like that, it was done. Another one. Cinder's voice cooed in his head, and without killing the host this time. Well done. It's crowded enough in here already. This time, someone else answered. It already is, but at least he isn't afraid to kill. He had an angry bull hiding in his soul, didn't he? So much for his theory. He ignored them and turned an eye to Raven's weapons. Her hilt was useless, but that sheet looked special. On a whim, he snatched up her broken blade and pressed it to the holster. A whir and a click and he found himself drawing a blade not of bloody red, but deepest wintry blue. Frost crackled across it. No, not simple frost but dust. A sheath that created dust blades. His eyes lit up. How much must it have cost to create a thing like this? It might be the only one of its kind in the world. Yup, taking that. He unbuckled the sheath from her belt, slammed her blade inside, and with a bit of fiddling, strapped it to the left side of his waist. She had no need for it where she was going. And speaking of going, I wonder. On a whim he focused his aura and slashed Adam's blade through the air. It snagged on something, but no portal emerged. Progress. Better than nothing. A second swipe, and he felt the air tear. Focus. An image of emerald burst to the forefront of his mind unbidden, and this time, the world answered. A crimson portal bloomed before him, a scarlet tether in the ether. On a whim, he thrust a hand through it. A voice yelped, a most familiar voice. What the hell? Emerald. He poked his head through and found her startled face staring back at him. Bandits are dealt. Mind sending some help for the bodies? Yeah, wait a second. He most assuredly did not and ducked back through too busy gloating over his new gift. So that was how Raven's semblance worked. It opened a portal to its owner's bonded ones. Those with whom one had forged either a lasting friendship, found themselves attached to, or otherwise drawn to. The revelation boggled the mind. This wasset was beyond useful. The sheer possibilities it presented were endless. If he made a friend in every kingdom not hard, given his personality he could essentially unlock fast travel there. Make enough and he could zip around the world without even running. Cinder offered a smug hum. He picked up a useful one this time. Indeed he had. He'd already bonded with Emerald. All to the good, that. It meant he'd be able to find and protect her wherever she was, no matter what happened to her. But who else had he connected with? Realization struck like a thunderclap and his eyes widened in a fit of glee. Amber, of course he had a portal to Amber. Oh, she was gonna love this. But first, his gaze strayed to Raven's body. She groaned softly. He sighed. What a drag. Will she live? Hard to say. The doctor adjusted his glasses and considered Raven's prone form atop the medical bed with a keen eye, regarding her skull wrapped in bloody bandages. Head wounds are often tricky things. He prodded the Bandit Queen's cheek, drawing a soft groan from her. She might survive, she might not. Even if she wakes up, I doubt she'll be wholly the same. Naruto granted him an arch look. Remember his name. Mustn't be rude. Wallace, was it mind filling me in? Nothing simpler. The bald man tittered and made a show of stroking the gray wisp of his mustache. You rattled her brain and cracked her skull, lad. People don't just get up and walk away from that. She'll be lucky to remember her own name, let alone walk and talk, I reckon. Despite himself, the reborn shinobi winced. That was no proper way to live. Might be a mercy to just kill her now. Still, she has aura, and I've seen folks bounce back before. What do you want done with her? Dunno. Wallace boomed a laugh. You really don't? Do you? This here is Raven Branwen, Scourge of Mistral. I've family over there. She's a right menace. A gray brow rose. Then what's she doing in Vale? The doctor shrugged carelessly. Looking to cause trouble, I reckon. Belatedly, he remembered her words. She said she was looking for something. Wallace fiddled with the bandages a while. Not looking his way. What might that be? A maiden. Looking for a young lass. Was she? There was no spark of comprehension that passed across the man's face, nor comprehension. Not many of those around here unless you count the Ark children. I'd be wary of that lot. A wrinkled finger wagged his way. They're a handful. All Nick is likely to tan your hide if you try courting one of them without his permission. Naruto snorted. Thanks for the warning. He considered Raven's prone form. There's a bounty on this one's head. The doctor granted him a toothy grin. A hefty one in these parts, placed by Beacon itself. 1 million lien. Alive. Well. Just like that he had a reason to want Raven alive after all. He couldn't rightly collect that bounty if she was dead now, could he? He waited until Wallace looked away, then subtly placed a hand on her head and sent a healing pulse of chakra threading through her skull. Not enough to close the wound outright, but enough to speed the healing and tear her away from death's door. Anything more than that might see her up and about before he left, which was something he didn't want. But with this, she'd be out of immediate danger. The rest was up to her. Will the police station pay her bounty out? Happily, Wallace clapped him on the back. You're a hero here, lad. You and that lass of yours are welcome any time. Good to know. Ansel was a nice place, but it was just a little too homey for him. Best to collect the money and move on now, while they could. I'll be going, then. Emerald's probably worried sick. She doesn't like the sight of dead bodies. Phew, the old doctor laughed and waved him on. You can see yourself out, I trust. Yup, will do. He nodded and made for the door. A woman was waiting for him just outside as he emerged. Much to his surprise, it wasn't Emerald. His sharp eyes took the newcomer in at a glance. She was slightly older than him by the look of her. Her wavy, dirty blonde hair seemed to shine in the afternoon light and her bright blue eyes were sharp. Clad in an orange sleeveless top matched by a beige sleeveless vest, she wore brown trousers bearing red stitches on each side, alongside brown boots. A strange bootlace necklace hung her neck, swaying a little as she cocked her head at him. You're the one that saved Jaune. Her voice was soft, almost musical. His friend, right? Sure, why not? He shrugged one shoulder. He's a good kid. He's my little brother. She planted a fist on her hip, looking him up and down. I wanted to thank you for what you did. Not just for the bandits, but for rescuing him. A pause now, as she seemed to grapple with something. You taught him a bit, didn't you? He's been bragging about it. Mouthy blonde, this one. And you are. Saffron orc. Those deep blue eyes swept up and down the length of him once more, considering him. You're taller than I thought you'd be. At length, she shrugged. Screw it. Naruto blinked. Screw what? Him what? Warm lips pressed against his cheek. Kurama offered a low whistle. Cinder made an appreciative noise. As far as rewards went, that really wasn't half bad. It raised his spirits, if nothing else. There. Saffron stepped back and wiped her mouth with a rueful grin and a blush besides. Got that out of my system. Damn shame you're not a girl. Tara would have been all over you. Still might be once I show her your picture. But you don't have a... Her scroll clicked. Shuki. Saffron stowed her scroll and shot him a sidelong look, as though searching for something. You're a good person, Mercury. It sounded more like a question than an actual statement. Was that a dig at him? He couldn't be sure. As much as I can be. He offered her a shrug in return. Saffron stared. And is your friend Emerald? She tries to be. I trust her. It was the right thing to say. Jaune's older sister stared at him, looked away, gripped her arms close to herself, and seemed to wrestle with something for a moment. All right, this is awkward. Finally, she found her resolve and looked back to him. That's me. She turned to face him and spread her arms wide. I'm the reason those people came here. Her eyes burned with blue flame, hot and heady. I'm the one the Bandit Queen was looking for. The beginning of a small, rueful smile plucked at the corner of her mouth. I did some things I shouldn't have and pissed her off because I'm the Spring Maiden. Sorry for involving you in this. If she expected that to evoke a startled response in him, she was wrong. Dead wrong. Naruto tilted his head to the right and blinked once. The hell's a maiden? Saffron's smile shattered. You must be joking. The storm was brewing. Ospin could sense it from the top of his tower. It wasn't something the naked eye could see. The skies remained clear for miles around, painted with the light of the setting sun. There was no sign of darkness or danger to the uninitiated. Indeed, insofar as Beacon was concerned, all was well. Students went about their lessons without a care in the world, no concern but for their homework, ending lessons and the approaching weekend. All the while, Bart, Glinda and Peter worked tirelessly to usher in the next generation. Well, Bart and Glinda worked. Peter told his stories. Some things never changed. And yet Ospin could taste in the air. That charge, the anticipation, the budding sensation of magic swelling in the distance. Of course he could sense it, that massive magic had once belonged to him after all. Even now, after being separated from it for years on end, he could still detect it. Such was how he knew. Somewhere, someone, somehow, a maiden had leapt into combat here in Vale. No, not just one maiden, but two. The thought left his throat feverishly dry. It couldn't be Amber, surely. Surely she wasn't that foolish. He already knew the answer. His scroll vibrated a heartbeat later. Against his better judgment, the old wizard picked it up. The news he received both made him hopeful and left him terrified. I see. Ansel, was it? Yes, I'll be by to retrieve her shortly. He set the phone down a moment later, bowed his head, and ran a hand through his hair. A long draft of his mug followed, taking the edge off his ragged nerves. Only then did he dare retrieve his scroll and make a call of his own. It ran once, twice, thrice, before someone finally retrieved it. A garbled, hungover growl greeted him. Kuro, yes, it's me. I know it's early. How would you feel about a family reunion? His old friend agreed readily once he gave him the details. What on earth was Raven Branwen doing in Ansel, who had beaten her within an inch of her life? This was going to be a long week, wasn't it? Ospin heaved a sigh, rose from behind his desk, and snatched up his cane. This bodes poorly. Take her power, take it now. Naruto heaved a patient sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. It was too much to hope Cinder would be quiet after Saffron's revelation. He hadn't known she was interested in these maidens, but the moment Saffron finished her explanation, well, the result spoke for himself. She'd been banging about on his head ever since he'd sat down, from the very moment he began meditating, demanding he take action. Holding his tongue only, made her louder. Honestly, she was beginning to annoy him. Her semblance was useful, make no mistake, but all these shrill shrieks were grinding on his last nerve. Will you be quiet in there? Cinder most assuredly would not. For the ruined remnant of a soul she was being quite vocal. She'd come roaring back to life and wouldn't be denied. That was the power Salem promised me I am owed. He dropped his smile and his facade as Mercury alongside it, cheeks dimpling in a bemused scowl. You are owed nothing, least of all this. And if you won't be quiet, he flooded his body with chaka until she shrieked and subsided. Feel that you have no body, no power, no nothing. All that's left is your ego. He heard someone snort in his head. I'm sorry, did I say something that you found funny, Adam? Moment of truth. Was it really him in his head? Would he respond? My apologies. Damn it all, that really was Taurus. I just enjoy watching her squirm. She tried to recruit me too, you know, all by her lonesome. It didn't end well. A sardonic chuckle swelled among his thoughts. More's the pity, I suppose. She had such grand plans all ash now, just like her namesake. Cinder snarled. Quiet, you. What will you do? Fall shriek at me, you have no power here. Neither of us do. That was decidedly more calm than he remembered Adam being. You're being awfully blasé for a dead man. Death has a way of sobering you. Cinder snarled. Not me. No one asked what you thought, woman. Adam beat him to the punch, delivering a verbal beatdown as only the damned could. No one will remember you. Not your allies, not your so-called mistress, no one. In the end you were a disposable pawn, a sacrifice meant to be used and discarded. Nothing more. Cinder made angry cinder noises before she rallied. And what of you? Blake will remember me if nothing else. Ah, no wonder he was so smug. As will Atlas. A man only truly dies when he is forgotten. And I will never be. My deeds will live on with infamy. Now, I'm in the head of the most powerful being on Remnant and I have his ear. I could do worse, have done worse. But you, he felt the threads of Adam's ego turn his way. Your semblance holds the potential to change the world. He shrugged one shoulder, not liking where this was going. Maybe if I wanted to. Sounded like a whole lot of work for nothing. Why should he care about any of that? You will, one way or another. The bull faunus couldn't be seen in the traditional sense of the word. Buddha had the feeling he was shrugging nevertheless. Power begets power and the world will take notice of you now. He winced a bit at that. Hey, I've been subtle. Your deeds were, Adam allowed, until you bested Raven Branwen and threw her in Ansel's jail. So, you do realize she's one of the most powerful huntresses this side of Remnant, wanted for countless crimes against humans and faunus alike. A nod. I do. Yet you defeated her. And this should concern me because... Cinder chuckled suddenly and he had the sudden sinking sensation he'd walked into a trap. It should, because Headmaster Ospin himself placed that bounty on her head. Shit. Indeed. Adam oozed satisfaction. I would suggest leaving Ansel before Ospin comes to call. He isn't the sort to let a pawn escape his grasp if he can help it. If he discovers you and Emerald, he'd never let them go. Emerald's semblance was versatile enough, but the ability to swipe semblances and stack them atop one another he'd never know peace. Even if they escaped his gaze, they'd be hunted across the kingdoms. That wasn't how he wanted to spend his second life. Still, curiosity reared its ugly head. You talk like you know him. I know enough. The faunus made a disgruntled noise. He's dangerous. We would be able to face him if we took the maiden's power. This from Cinder. He kept his eyes closed but resolutely shook his head all the same. No one is taking anything. Why not? That fool of an Ark girl doesn't even want the gift. It would be better with Miriam, I mean us. A blonde brow rose. You slipped, there. I am dead, let me have this. Not a chance. Give her an inch and she'd try to take a yard. And you, Adam? The dead faunus merely grunted. I don't care much one way or another, but I would prefer not to spend the rest of my life under that man's gaze. Speaking of which, the blonde woman has been trying to get your attention for the last minute or so, now. He snapped back to reality. Saffron coughed above him, returning him to the present. Are you all right? I'm fine. He creaked an eye open and waved a hand. Just dealing with some inner demons. She looked like she wanted to pry, but held back, squirming a little under his gaze. Are you done meditating? More or less. He drew himself up from his sitting position and pivoted to face her. And you, I take it you've prepared yourself. More or less. She clasped both hands behind her hips and sing-songed back at him. Squaring off against her in the yard of Ark family household seemed a foolish idea, but she'd been adamant about this and he'd reluctantly accepted. If he was going to know what a maiden was, he needed to see what one was capable of, what they could do in a fight, their powers and their limits. And besides, it allowed him to put on a bit of a show for the Ark children. At least their parents weren't around. Thank heaven for small mercies. Are you sure about this? Not at all. Saffron shrugged. Do you have a better idea? Naruto blew out a soft, exasperated sigh of his own. Not particularly. Then prepare yourself. Saffron walked away from him, took 3 steps. You want to see what a maiden can do? I'll show you. Maybe then you'll understand why I want to be rid of this power. He shrugged his shoulder. All right, just remember, you asked for this. Saffron barreled on, wincing a little. Just keep your aura up. All right, I can't exactly control the power too well. It's still new to me. At best I can it. Maybe change the weather and push it in a given direction, but that's about it. He unsheathed Adam's sword and crooked his free hand at her, beckoning. Come on, then. I'm not getting any younger here. Emerald pumped a fist from the barrel she'd claimed for herself. Begin. Saffron brought her hands together with a shout. A cone of fire flooded Naruto's vision. Adam's sword sang as he swung through it, flame parting before red as steel like so much butter. Saffron came crashing through it, one hand poised to strike. He ducked her clumsy punch and drove a kick into her throat to stagger her. Aura crackled in held. His eyes widened. She immediately rewarded him with a gust of wind. It flung him back, being one of the few things he couldn't fight against, and sent him skidding across the yard. He sheathed his sword to strike and she flung a lightning bolt his way. Trying to cut that without chakra was a mistake. Raw current crackled down his sword arm as every muscle in his body clamped down. Saffron was on him a moment later, already conjuring another cone of flame between her hands. Small wonder she'd told him to keep his aura up. He flung it to the fore as the inferno hit him head-on. Almost immediately, he felt his reserves nosedive. Flushing his body with chakra remedied the worst of the spasms and allowed him to regain control of his limbs. He raised Adam's sword and tanked the attack, drinking it in with his secondary semblance until the blade vibrated in his grasp. His goal achieved, he kicked out to the side and tumbled free from the fire. Ice crept up across his feet, rooting him in place once more. That settled it. Maidens were bullshit. It didn't stop him from sheathing his sword. His hair flashed red for a single blinding instant and the ice at his feet shattered. A low growl rumbled through the air. Block this, he warned. Saffron did all that and more. She yelped and flung up her arms, conjuring a thick wall of ice. Adam's sword tore free and cut right through, melting the ice as it went, pierced her aura and stopped just shy of her throat. Saffron giggled nervously. Thanks for stopping. Nearly lost my head there. Don't mention it. Seriously. He sheathed his blade and stepped back. This never happened. All right. Her teeth chattered a little. Do you see now? I never wanted this power. I'm no good with it. She actually was. The foundations were there, but she refused to see them. She was too terrified by the prospect of her power, of what might happen to her family, to wield it properly. That was a shackle in and of itself. He almost pitied her, but clearly family meant more to her than power. He could respect that, if nothing else. She offered him her hand. Can you take it? Cinder practically squealed like a giddy schoolgirl in his head. Yes, we can. Naruto eyed Saffron's palm like a live snake, a poison chalice tempting him oh so sweetly. What makes you think I can? Don't lie. Her fingers curled into a fist, one she planted against her hip as she glared at him, eyes still shining with flames. I know what you can do. You have Raven's semblance. I saw her use it before, and then you back at the gates. To say nothing of that sword trick you just used. No one else can do that, so take it. She spread her arms wide. Free me from this curse. I wouldn't call that power a curse, you know. It is. She gave him a grim look. I'll be hunted for the rest of my days and I can barely use it, let alone aim it. Here at last, her expression turned rueful. I was never trained to be a huntress. I only got this power by chance. The last maiden was leagues better than me. Better it go to someone else, anyone else. Emerald appeared between then, hand raised. I volunteer as tribute. Oi, he slapped her hand down. We don't even know if I can take this without killing her. Don't you? Saffron flinched at the implicit promise of her demise, enthusiasm cooling. You didn't kill Raven. That's a completely different kettle of fish and you know it. He jabbed at her bosom, forcing her back with a scowl. Didn't you tell me the power can only be passed on at death? Saffron looked past him to the house, where her siblings awaited. Yeah, but maybe you're the exception. He could hear the hope in her voice. She really wanted to be rid of Spring, didn't she? Snatching a semblance was one thing, but this power was deeper, older. Even now he could see how deeply intertwined it was with her. It wasn't something he could just rip out of her, he would have to be careful. Delicate, even. Can you at least try? Emerald was looking at him expectantly. Saffron clasped her hands, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Fine. He deflated under their shared gaze. Lower your aura and give me your hand. If this starts to kill you, I'm stopping. Please, do. She offered him her hand, fingers splayed. I'd rather not die. He flicked a look at Emerald. Talk to Jaune and the others, please. Tell them not to breathe a word of this. She rolled her eyes, but did as she was bade, realizing just how serious he was. He gripped Saffron's fingers and threw his semblance at her like a net. Draped it over her now, wrapped his aura around hers. The world blurred. Saffron had no semblance to take, and was fully accepting of him, thus there was next to no resistance. It was smooth, seamless. She opened herself to him fully and he dove into her, slipping into her skin as a fish would water. Sights and sounds assailed him, accompanied by a mass of myriad emotions he couldn't quite quantify. He felt a deep and all-consuming love for someone named Tara. Memories of rushing into a blonde man's arms, her father, and being tackled by her siblings. Peace and joy, the thrill of a first kiss, happiness tinged by regret and fear because of. There it was. Now that he knew what to look for, the power of the Spring Maiden burned like a beacon in his mind's eye, bright and gold and green. Whatever it was drastically different from a semblance. He could feel it woven tightly against her soul, not seamless, not precise, but neither could he call it parasitic. It didn't seem to be harming her, so. All right, let's try this. He reached in with his semblance, his soul, and wrapped his hands around the pulsing magic. In touching it, he understood. Knowledge flooded into him. It wasn't some mindless mass of magic, it was sentient. Alive. It ached to be used, utilized, unleashed. He'd been right. This thighs wasn't parasitic at all. If anything, it was a symbiotic relationship. The power bound itself to a female host and grew stronger from each one. In turn, they gained tremendous command of the elements and the ability to unlock vaults. The hell was a vault? Not much detail there. I want to play. The light sang in his grasp, an endless happy babble akin to that of a delighted child reunited with a long-lost parent. Use me. Shaking his head, he gently extricated himself from Saffron's soul. The power of the Spring Maiden didn't like that. It sensed his strength, his retreat, and tried to cling to him as he withdrew. He allowed it, grasping a fine tendril with one hand to tether himself, letting it latch on as a crude anchor. From there, he found the fine stitches that bound it to Saffron's and, one by one, undid them. Her soul shivered under his touch. It was slow, delicate work. It would have been easier to just rip it out of her, but doing that would surely kill her where she stood. Without warning, Spring came free, and all hell broke loose. Later he would realize his mistake. The maiden power was currently connected to him, and freed so suddenly from its host, it had nowhere else to go. He'd thought himself safe from such, given that he was, well, clearly not a girl. He was mistaken. Saffron was currently thinking of him, and while he was most emphatically male, he also held a whiny, noisy, shattered shard of a woman's ego in his head. The outcome had never been in question. Spring latched on, and it latched hard. Heat and fire and wife and life rushed into him with such force that he found himself propelled out of Saffron's soul and thrust into the waking world. In his own body once more, he staggered back in shock and gasped for air that seemed all too slow to come. He had the power, it was there, he could feel it, but Saffron's soul was still in place. Yet he couldn't use the power. It didn't come as a surprise to Naruto. If anything, he'd been expecting it. Anything keyed to a woman would be as such. Whoever had created the power had been cautious. Downright paranoid, really. Even now he could feel it buzzing beneath his skin, burning his blood, singing in his soul. It made him feel restless, anxious, powerful, but also cut off. He could not access it. And judging by Cinder's angry noises, neither could she. No, it's not fair. I can feel it, but I can't use it. Adam laughed at her. Perhaps that was for the best. Too much power often went to one's head, and while he wanted it all, he didn't want to lose himself. Saffron claimed only women could properly utilize it. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was not. Maybe he just wasn't meant to use it. But he could hold it, perhaps even decide who the next successor Orga. My hero Saffron slammed into him at speed and squashed his head against her bosom, drawing an angry squawk from Emerald. You did it, I can't feel it anymore, it's gone. You are welcome, he garbled a helpless reply between her breasts. Kinda sending conflicting messages here. You don't know how much this means to me. She drew back and he finally saw the tears running down her face. My family will be safe now. Hell, I can go back to Argus, be with Terra and live a normally her eyes, she gasped, suddenly covering her mouth with both hands. They're glowing. Naruto heaved a weary sigh and ran a hand down his face. What now? See for yourself. Emerald held up nearer. Gods knew where she'd gotten it from. He peered into it regardless and scowled at what he saw there. They were glowing sure enough, silver orbs bleeding gray flames at the edges. He touched a hand to them, expecting pain. They weren't hot at all, but rather warm to the touch. Indeed, they didn't burn as he might have expected, but he felt it the same. Well, that wasn't ominous at all. If this didn't stop soon, he might have to invest in a thick pair of sunglasses going forwards, or maybe a blindfold. So what does this make you? Mercury Saffron asked reluctantly. A maiden. He considered his palm for a moment, fingers trembling but a little. I'm not entirely sure. He flung out a hand. Nothing happened. The power sizzled in his soul but remained blessedly inert. Emerald sulked. Why can't I have it? Because it's a burden. Power of the seasons, she clicked her tongue at him. I would have killed for that. Hell, I still would. People will kill you for it. Saffron chided her in return. Without a second thought. That's the problem, and why I want nothing to do with it. In truth, it was tempting to give it to Emerald. It would make her more powerful, ensure her loyalty beyond a doubt. But he wasn't sure he wanted to. She's right. In the end, he decided to defer the decision for now. This isn't something mankind can be trusted with, clearly. Emerald looked downright mutinous. He could just feel her approval dropping by the second. But you can. He knew his retort before it even left his lips. I'm more than a man, sweetheart. I'm a champion. Ugh, that's so corny. Maybe so, but after all, who better? He knew what it was to be a container for a dangerous power that everyone feared or otherwise craved. Emerald didn't. She only saw the promise of power and what it could do for her. Power corrupted in absolute, power corrupted absolutely. But I want to be used. Adam and Cinder made startled noises in his head. His eyes widened alongside them, processing what he'd just heard. Oh dear, deal with the new voice later. Best to nip Emerald's anger in the bud while he could. He looked to Saffron. Can we have a moment? Certainly. Her smile was absolutely beatific and just a shade shy of sultry. I need to have a word with my chatterbox of a brother, anyway. Come find me afterward. Naruto heard Jaune gulp on the sidelines. Poor boy. He was about to get the telling off of a lifetime for running his mouth. He'd make for a decent distraction at least. While she was thus occupied, he drew a sullen Emerald aside to a shady corner of the Ark's yard as Saffron stomped away. In short order, they withdrew to the very edge of their property, overlooking a homey little garden overlooked by a wooden fence. It was here that she finally dared to face him. Are you angry with me? She looked to him with pleading eyes. Did I do something wrong? No. He held up a hand. That's not it at all. I wanted to explain my reason from keeping this power from you, for now. Her eyes lit up. I can be more useful to you with that power, sir. She pleaded, and it was the fact that she said sir at all that alarmed him. I can help you, I can protect you. He saw her expression inside. Just as he thought, then, Simir. He drew her closer to him. Just Simir. She stiffened a little as he wrapped her in a warm embrace, but didn't otherwise resist. On the contrary, she was quite eager to accept the physical affection for what it was and snuggled closer. The way she clung to him almost made him think of a small child, not a young woman. He patted her head with one hand, idly running his fingers through her green hair. She made a tiny noise and scooted closer. I don't want to be left behind. You won't be. Promise. Yes, I do. And I'm not letting go. Good. That's goo. I don't want to let go either. Naruto shrugged to hide his own telltale smile and pain. He felt a terrible tug on his mind, lurching to the east. Raven's semblance. But everyone he had a bond with was here except. His eyes widened. Amber. Hello, little girl. Amber leaped out of her sleeping bag with a yelp. Nope. All the nope stranger danger do not want. Even as she pivoted, she heard something thrust out at her in the dark. She parried clumsily with her staff and lurched to her feet. A boot found her chest and kicked her away, sending her sprawling. Cold steel glinted in the dark, stabbing for her torso. If it weren't for her maiden powers, she would have died then and there. A vicious gust of wind propelled her backwards, narrowly saving her life. Oh, boo. A merry voice crooned. And here I thought my ambush was perfect. She could barely see him in the gloom, but she saw enough to make her shiver. Tall and lanky, all wiry muscle. He was a faunus, of that much she could be certain. The slender scorpion tail swaying underneath his coat was a dead giveaway. Even then, he didn't look quite right in the head. There was a wild, almost mad gleam in his eye as he brandished his wrist-mounted daggers. There was such a thing as being too friendly, and this one was. He was one of hers then. Had to be. So it is you after all. He cackled happily. Good. For a moment I thought I might be mistaken. Oh, happy day. Who are you? He hid a titter behind his palm. Come into my parlor, said the scorpion to the butterfly. She gulped and readied herself, brandishing her staff with both hands. I don't think that's the saying. Isn't it? Her attacker tilted his head, frowned, and touched a finger to his chin. Oh, well, I suppose it will do. My name is Tyrian, dear girl. He sketched a deep bow, casting his coat aside in the offing as gracefully as a master dancer. Nice to stab you. Oi, you're supposed to say meet, not stab. He lunged at her with a mad cackle, cutting her off. Amber didn't have time to correct him after that. She was far too busy trying to survive. Or she was, until a crimson portal slashed open ahead of her and a familiar boot barreled through. It caught Tyrian dead in the head, sending him crashed backwards. And then Mercury Black stepped through the crimson ether. For the first time since she'd met him, he wasn't smiling. It was, in a single bloody word, terrifying. Nice semblance you got there. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Tyrian felt it in his bones, especially his funny bone, the instant he laid eye on the interloper emerging from that Reborn Black portal. Truth be told, he didn't much like what he felt. From the moment he heard him speak, he was on full alert, and he couldn't quite say why. Call it instinct. Call it intuition. Call it oh shit he looks angry, or whatever you wish. The fact remained. Nice semblance you got there. Even with those fateful words, the young man standing before him appeared normal enough. There were no fancy flashy foolish colors or outlandish weapon to mark him as a huntsman or a potential aspirant. Indeed, this one seemed to prefer more muted colors of black and blue mingled with gray, the better to match his hair. He could have been anyone, someone he would have walked right past on the street. It was only his smile that hinted at anything more, the look of a quiet killer masked by a facade of callous snark. Madness knew madness. After all, he'd managed to catch him off guard. Few could claim such a feat. What fun, oh what fun. So yes, Tyrian knew something was off. It gnawed at the back of his broken like an infernal itch, oh yes it did, and just couldn't seem to scratch it. Giggling softly to himself, the merry faunus regarded his attacker anew. This newcomer was more than meets the eye, oh yes, but what was it about Hamaha the eyes? They were silver, oh yes, the hated silver, the color his goddess despised. All the more reason to kill him, then. He could pluck his eyes out and present them to Salem as well. Oh, yes, he rather liked the sound of that. Tyrian stood with grin, golden eyes gleaming as he rubbed his still-etching skull. How it sizzled and stung. Perhaps he could entertain himself with this one before he killed him and brought the maiden back to his goddess. Such a tale he would have to tell her. Because you see, he recognized those portals, or at least the one the lad had come through. Red as blood, swirling with dark promise. Only one woman on Remnant used those, and she was known to his goddess. Raven Branwen was against them, it seemed. A shame. Perhaps she had never left Ospin at all. They must have been monitor the maiden all this time, waiting for him to pounce. Well, the old fool had played his hand, oh yes he had. Salem must be warned. Then the fall maiden gasped out a name and things got interesting. Mercury. To his great delight, the young man actually looked away from him, so very foolish, and laid a hand on her head. Stay put. I'll handle him. But how are you here? He only smiled. I'll explain everything later. Oh, so they knew one another, how quaint. Were the acquaintances friends, lovers? All right, buddy. The aptly named Mercury drew his blade, laid it against a nearby fence, and looked to him with mild annoyance. Who are you? Who I am doesn't matter, not to you. The faunus paused and thumbed his chin, considering. Well, you do interest me, but no, I only matter to her. A finger swayed Amber's way. Don't I, little girl? The wound maiden blinked, still clutching her stomach. She looked woozy, doubtlessly feeling the poison's effects coursing through her bloodstream. Such innocent ignorance couldn't be feigned. You haven't the slightest clue, do you? Oh, how exciting this must be. And it was to be summoned by her grace, he remembered when he first received such a summons. How lucky this little maiden was to be selected by Salem herself, how blessed. Alas, she only looked angry. What do you want? Oh, he feigned fear and cringed away for a moment before swaying back in. The maiden bites back, my dear girl, a hand swept forth. I'm here to whisk you away with me. She recoiled. By attacking me? Well, poisoning you and knocking you out. He offered her a small shrug. All the same thing, really. Mercury tapped a booted foot down in the dit. Look, pal, I'm not sure who you are, but you need to leave the lady alone. Scram and I might let you live. Oh, they were onto names now, were they? How exciting. It might be fun to play this game for a little while. After all, killing without introducing oneself was terribly rude. Why, friend, my name is Tyrian. He sketched a shallow bow, never once taking his eyes from the prize at hand. And I'm afraid that is not possible. My assignment from her grace was to retrieve this young girl. He licked his lips, watching said girl shudder. So that is what I must do. One does not upset the queen, of course. I'm sure you understand. He expected a demand for answers, anger at the very least. Right, you're clearly a basket of crazy. Mercury Black surprised him by cracking his neck and stalking forward. I think we've had enough talk now, don't you? Tyrian's smile thinned. Impatient pup, so full of hot air, so eager to rush to the slaughter. Very well. If you're so eager to die, then by all means, let us dispense with the pleasantries and... Why couldn't he see? It took him a moment to realize why. A hand had closed around his face in a flying lariat to propel him backwards. Scarce did he realize that then said hand smashed him down into the ground. Something popped in his spine and breath burst from his lungs as he gasped for air, pain snarling through every fiber of his being. How unable to comprehend this unexpected reversal of fortunes, his maddened mind struggled to understand how he'd gone from grinning at his next victim to being sprawled out on his back. He came up with nothing, no less than nothing. It didn't make a lick of sense. It certainly didn't help that said victim was currently stood over him, grinning ear to ear. Hands planted in his pockets, Mercury sneered down at him, no longer that seemingly harmless boy. Hey, now, his too familiar voice crooned from on high, is that all you've got? Don't tell me you're done already. Squinting through a haze of pain, Tyrian struggled to rise. That's better, the boy chortled, leaning down to leer at him. It wouldn't be any fun if you went down in one hit now, would it? Tyrian lunged up at him with a snarl. His wrist blade slashed a log. What in the world? An iron boot barreled headlong into his back. How did that brat get behind him? And he found himself launched toward the tree line at terminal velocity. Most would have panicked, faltered, and died. Not him. Despite his initial surprise, he swiftly recovered and gave himself to momentum, laughing all the while. With a quick pivot, he whirled in midair, caught a bough with his venomous tail, and swung himself upright toward what he knew to be safety. He had the high ground now. No matter how quick the boy was, it would take him time to scale this tree. His feet had only just settled when a hand burst from the bark and closed around the back of his head. To hell with your high ground. Tyrian was still trying to figure out how Mercury Black smashed through a bloody tree to get him when the latter smashed him face first into the dirt. A heavy stomp on his spine pinned him there, holding him in place as an ominous whine filled the air above him. A frisson of fear shot through his heart for the first time in a long time. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Something was very wrong indeed. He shouldn't be this fast, couldn't be this strong. What was going on? What's wrong, old man? The boy applied further pressure between his shoulder blades, leering down at him once more. Aren't you going to show me that semblance of yours? Tyrian went wild. Flowing into a spinning somersault and a slash, followed by a series of twirling kicks, he struck out with absolutely every facet of his body, tail included. The resulting dervish of death forced his oppressor to step back, if only to avoid suffering the same fate of his comrade. Even then he managed to mark him with one hand and bite through his aura near the ribs. The brief retreat allowed Tyrian to find his footing, if only just. With armored legs like those and no visible weapon beside that blade he'd set aside, Tyrian assumed the newcomer was a kicker, one who interposed the occasional grab in his fighting style. Thus it came as quite the surprise when the little shit decked him right in the schnoz. Fist plus face multiplied by broken nose equals pain. Who knew? Not him. He wasn't used to getting hit. He was the hitter, not the hitty. Wait, was that the right word? But semantics. Not for him these punches and puerile pain. Hazel was the one who took a pounding, Watts was the smart one, and Cinder the expendable container who craved power. Tyrian was the one you sent in when you wanted someone to die. Or get kidnapped. Either or really. Point being, he wasn't used to being battered the right way round. He didn't have the aura for it, and it showed. Those last 2 hits had shaved more than a quarter off his, while the brat before him remained fresh as a daisy. Even with that slash just now, he seemed utterly at his ease. Mercury touched a hand to the bloody slice just below his ribs, humming now as the wound closed. So you really can cut through aura? Fascinating. A shiver of dread shot down Tyrian's spine as the silveried warrior looked at him. He didn't like the way the brawler grinned just then. I'm starting to find this fun. His head tilted just so, the ghost of a smile spreading across his pale face. Let's experiment a little, shall we? He was still speaking when stomped down with both feet and launched himself forward, whirling into a spinning kick that Tyrian, unfortunately, made the mistake of blocking. The very moment he did, his blades buckled, bending inward. The ground cratered underfoot and he found himself bending backward, unable to bring the barrels within to bear. What are your legs made of? Pure metal. Mercury didn't rise to the bait at him more a leer really and pressed an open palm into his stomach. Racing gun, he declared jovially. Glass version. What in Salem's name was a racing gun? Why were his ears ringing and why was pain mute in his face? Tyrian lifted his head from the ground with a groan, covered in countless cuts. His arms and legs ached. Meanwhile, his body felt like it had just been through a blender and back again. His aura levels were down by half now and he hadn't seen a damn thing. But he certainly felt it, as well as saw the razor-sharp shards of glass littering the ground. So that's what it does. Mercury's voice crooned through his ringing ears. It's like a shrapnel bomb. Good to know. I'll have to experiment more. He could still salvage this, surely. The brat had just caught him off guard. Yes, that was all, but he had to know how was he doing this? What kind of semblance is that? Sorry, Mercury sketched a stage performer's bow. A true magician never gives away his secrets. That said, it's so nice to have some room to fight. He reached up and opened his collar, eyes gleaming gold. Let's use the open space some more, shall we? He stomped a foot down and a wave of molten glass burst forth, forcing him to skip backward or be skewered where he stood. Wait, glass, wasn't that cinder sack? His thoughts shattered and breath burst from his lungs as Mercury barreled into him, driving a knee into his gut. Tyrian folded over the limb with a dull wheeze, but the boy wasn't done. Even as he retched for air, a brutal hammer fist rocketed into his face, followed by a left hook, then a right, now a kick to his chest to hurl him away. All the while his aura continued to plummet and his spirits with it. This wasn't happening. This mustn't be happening. This just couldn't be happening. He hadn't been manhandled like this in years, decades, not since Salem Herselfborg. An open palm cracked across his face, snapping his head to the side. His aura sputtered weakly. He peppered him with gunfire and was rewarded with a bemused laugh. The bullets bounced off his unprotected body with an awful squealing sound, skittering away as though they'd struck steel. Mercury closed with him a second later, grabbed him by the arm, and threw him over his shoulder. By grace or blind bloody luck, Tyrian managed to snap a kick into his chest as he sailed by. More, Mercury chided with an ill-concealed smile. Tyrian lurched upright and slashed at him. I said more. Another punch left him reeling like a drunkard at last call. Put more aura behind it when you strike me. Clenched knuckles barreled into his face. Mercury ignored the punch like it didn't even exist. A hand closed around the back of Tyrian's braid and yanked. He stabbed him in the chest with his rightmost wrist-mounted blade and the blade broke. Golden eyes creased in a smile. What did I just say? A toss sent him Tyrian tumbling, a kick launched him skyward. He was still airborne when the fool's fist found him. A hammer blow smashed him down into the dirt. He righted himself. Mercury was right there in his face, grinning from ear to ear, teeth gone sharp, eyes glowing with flames. Had enough. What the devil? Close, but not quite. He pointed at him with one finger, thumb upright, forming a gun. Bang! Something struck Tyrian in his lowermost hip, drilled into his flesh, and sent him sprawling on his face. He heard the whirl of energy and tumbled aside a split second before something slammed into the dirt and smashed a crater into it. Rolling frantically, he avoided 3 more until one caught him in the shoulder and sent him reeling all over again. Laughter rose in his ears, and for the first time since the brawl began it wasn't his own. Do you like it really? It's simple twist on a timeless classic. Mercury lowered his finger and blew away the smoke. I call it the racing gun. Name might need a bit of work, though. Finger guns, really? How childish are you? Mercury tittered. This from the madman. Tyrian snarled wetly. Oh, poor baby. The arrogant youth lowered his hand, crooning at him like the child he no longer was, hadn't been for quite some time. Is this too tough for you? Do you need a handicap? He planted both hands in his pockets, raised a leg, and whistled at him. How's this? I won't use my arms for the next 5 minutes. Amber hid a giggle behind her hand. And with that, Tyrian's blood began to boil. They were mocking him, laughing at him, just like those awful people on that bad day in Vacuo. Of course, we could cut this short. His fellow madman granted him a chiding grin. Get down on your knees and apologize. I might forgive you, then. The words were the spark that set his temper ablaze. Insolent pup. Mercury snickered. You're the one barking like a mad dog. Tyrian saw red. A bounding leap carried him forward. Die. Mercury met him with a smile. Already did that, didn't stick. He became a hurricane of death, but the boy was like water. He swayed left, then right, now left again, hopped over a sweep of his legs and tripped him. A barrage of kicks followed to break his bones and blast him away. The last was particularly humiliating, snapping his head back to leave him spitting teeth. I knew, didn't I? He reeled, coughing blood. From the moment the first blow landed, I knew the truth, that he was stronger, that there was a gap in our strength. Where to think it was to this extent. He thought he wouldn't care if he couldn't kill him. The maiden was his true objective, not this maddening monkey, silver eyes or no. Yet having this difference thrust in his face. I'll kill him, I swear on Salem. I will end this boy or die trying. So swearing, he spun and snapped off a shot at the wounded Amber, trying to distract him. It worked, albeit not the way he'd intended. Mercury seamlessly stepped between them and batted it away with a palm. Hey, Tyrian tittered at his foolishness, sensing weakness at last. You only weaken yourself by defending her. She'll slow you down. Don't worry. Mercury swept a hand through his messy hair, forcing it upright once more. Even then a few gray bangs fell over his face, concealing his eyes from view. After all, Tyrian stiffened. He wasn't going to say it, surely not. Mercury was gonna. You're weak. A muscle jumped in Tyrian's jaw. His ears began to ring. He ground his teeth until he felt something pop in the back of his jaw. Red. He had seen that frenzied color once before already, but now no. His world went white. Obliterate. Exterminate. Annihilate. Don't underestimate me. Tyrian bared his teeth and lunged. I'll leave your corpse for the crows. Mercury only smiled. Let's use the open space some more. Amber ducked with a yelp as Tyrian rocketed overhead, propelled backward by the sheer force of Naruto's kick to hurtle off the road. His back struck a tree and he found himself wedged there, but only for a moment as the grinning warrior materialized to drive a fist into then through his battered stomach. The tree burst into a pile of sawdust, then the poor faunus was gone, launched deep into the forest as one might fling a skipping stone across the lake. She didn't think for a moment that would put him down for good. Mercury walked past her with a wink and strode over to the fence to retrieve his blade where he'd left it. His hand closed around the hilt, and Tyrian Kalos reappeared with a yowl, diving upon him in a dervish of death, slashing and screaming and spitting like the lunatic he was. Her savior rolled his eyes and didn't so much as deign to look backward before throwing an elbow into the melee. Amber heard an awful crack. The faunus crumpled, clutching at his face, blood seeping through his fingers. Naruto. Mercury turned to face him with an almost disappointed sigh. I keep telling you to put more force into your attacks. You basta. Egg. His words warped into a wail as Wilf flicked out, severing his tail before it could reach him. Naruto clicked his tongue and smiled. When will you learn? It was not a nice smile. Tyrian screamed. He was still screaming when Naruto grabbed him by the hair and reeled him into a crushing kick. Up and down, right, left and center, he brutally battered his older opponent into the ground. There was nothing he could do to stop him. It didn't matter if he could cut through aura. Whatever would he inflicted healed thrice as fast and only emboldened Naruto to be all the more vicious. Don't go breaking on me now, Tyrian. I'll keep playing with you until I get bored. Amber watched as he dismantled the faunus like he didn't even exist. Kinda made her wish she had popcorn. He couldn't win. It galled Tyrian to no end, but there it was. He'd underestimated his opponent. He could admit that much now, though it galled him. He was being beaten, badgered, and brutalized left, right, and center. His aura was all but gone, and his body wasn't far behind. A fair victory was well and truly beyond his grasp. But he didn't have to win fairly now, did he? A swollen eye darted toward Amber. She was his weakness. Tyrian could see it in her eyes, the way she watched the brawl intently, knowing full well her fate hinged upon this fight. For all her fire and fury, she couldn't fight at the moment. And once Mercury slipped well, then he would have her. In with the knives and down she went. He held back a maddened giggle thinking about it because that would be very rude. After all, you didn't laugh at a kicked dog when it was down. It just wasn't done. Okay, maybe a little. Mercury flung a lazy kick his way. Rather than retaliate, Tyrian dove between his legs and launched himself at Amber. Her eyes widened. She was utterly unprepared. Even now she tried to muster a spark in her hand, but in the time it took her to do so, it was too late. He'd already closed the distance and reared back to strike. Now what would it be? Would Mercury sacrifice himself for her, or would he let her die? Or perhaps a crimson flash smashed into his back, sending him sprawling past the maiden, head over heels into the dirt. He was still struggling to right himself when the fool snatched Amber up by the scruff of her neck. Then he turned his head and lashed out with his still-sheathed blade. Almost immediately, a dark tether opened in the air, an all-too-familiar portal leading to Salem. Tyrian blinked, terribly confused by the sight. Weren't those Branwen's portals? But then how was he? Oh, that was bad. Emerald. Mercury hollered at someone on the other side. Catch, take care of her for me. Then he shoved a very startled Amber through. No, Tyrian lunged after her, reaching. The portal whisked shut in his face, leaving him to pass through empty air and flounder in the dirt. Mercury's jaded laughter mocked his failed attempt almost immediately. Oh, so close. Tyrian didn't hear. Failure. Salem would never forgive him for this. He had to die. Mercury Black must die. Nothing else could avenge this humiliation. The ground burst beneath his feet as he rocketed forward with a wordless scream, striking with every scrap of strength left to him. An awful clang reached his ears, and too late, he knew his mistake. Mercury had drawn his sword at long last and taken the blow on his blade, absorbing it into the steel. He wasn't quite sure why, but for some reason the sight filled him with a preternatural dread. Because you see, the boy's hair flashed red. He looked up at him with a Cheshire grin. "Welcome to my den," said the fox to the scorpion. "Hey, that's my line." Mercury placed the sword sheath against his chest, bringing him up short. Why do that? It was just some stupid sheath. It wasn't as though it were a weapon. A deafening roar filled his ears. Aura buckled, fractured, shattered now as it unloaded into him. Once, twice, thrice, Tyrian stumbled backward, clutching his bloody chest. He realized his blood ran down his lips. A shotgun sheath. That is just so absurd. He was still alive, still breathing, if only just, but he soon wished he wasn't. The slash of scarlet steel was his only warning. Belated though it was, Mercury was on him a moment later. He was enjoying himself too much. Far too much. Really, he was. On a certain level, Naruto knew it was wrong to lose oneself in a fight. If there was one useful thing that Marcus and his incessant beatings had taught him, it was essential that you never lose control of your emotions in the heat of battle. You could feel mad or sad or any other thing, but you must always keep control. He'd seen what happened when you didn't, when you let your feelings rule you at every given moment. You became a bitter shell of a person who delighted in cruelty. As such, he had gone into this fight determined to control himself. His intention was to deal with the threat and get Amber to safety swiftly. And yet, Cinder had been bad. Harem was downright spiteful. Tyrian, he was exactly like his twisted namesake. Rotten, twisted, tainted to the very core. Only death could cure him. And his would come later rather than sooner. Because you see, unlike Cinder and Adam, Tyrian Kalos had made one fatal mistake. He tried to take away one of his friends. Nobody touched his friends. Let's see how you like feeling weak. He slashed off one of his arms, leaving him yowling. Small, helpless, afraid. Off went another arm. Then a leg, followed by the other. He wasn't even berserk. He didn't have the excuse for raving madness. He was well past that now, into a surreal calm, a frigid wrath concealed behind a pleasant veneer, akin to a fox playing with its food. There was no escape. Tyrian was dead the moment he saw him, the moment he laid eyes on Amber's wound. Taking the man's semblance was going to be the cherry atop a sugary sweet sundae of pain. Revenge was a dish best served cold after all, and his was going to be glacial. It's a lovely night, don't you think, Scorpion? He looked up with a small smile. The moon's shining, there's not a cloud in the sky, and there's nowhere for you to hide. Tyrian tried to crawl away using nothing but his chin and the stump of his tail. Here at the end, he'd finally been broken. Naruto smiled at the sight, savoring the moment. A fitting end for a madman. Time to wrap this up once and for all. Adam heaved a sigh within his head. I suppose I should count myself lucky. At least I died quickly. Cinder groused her own sullen agreement. Fool. He should have run while he had the chance. Come on, now. Naruto loped after Tyrian, dragging his feet as the faunus frantically, fruitlessly, redoubled his efforts to escape. Keep trying. Crawl away. Get up. It's been a while since I actually had to exert myself properly. He reached him and grabbed him by the back of his head, pushing him into the dirt. What's wrong? Can't you do that? Tyrian garbed a sob. All that tough talk earlier, but you're just a lunatic. He gave his head a shake for good measure. An animal, a mad dog doing its master's bidding. You did as you were told and nothing more. That hunger to seize your ideals is what you were lacking. Unlike me. A small smile touched his face. I've got ambition for days in this life. Killing you will just be another notch on my belt, and I won't stop there. Your semblance will be a useful tool. Hell, his lips quirked as a thought occurred to him. I might even pilfer those weapons of yours. Hidden blades are pretty damn useful. Amber could use some better weapons. Tyrian whimpered. Naruto closed both his eyes and heart to it. There could be no room for mercy, no, not here. He knew the madman would not change. He couldn't change. He was incapable of it. There was only one end to this story, one outcome he would accept. The faunus had already seen too much. Letting him live wasn't in the cards. He'd just report to his master, whomever that was, and then he'd have no peace. He knew what must be done. And yet, it was so easy to kill him. Effortless, even. Was he starting to enjoy this? He'd balked at killing, once. Do it, Cinder's voice goaded him. It's what he deserves. I never liked the bastard anyway. Adam made an annoyed noise. As much as I hate disagree with Fall on anything, she actually has a point here. This man is your enemy. Do not hesitate. Show him no mercy, for if your positions were reversed, he would grant you none. I know. Tyrian balked at him. Who are you talking to? Damn it, he'd heard that. Steeling himself, Naruto opened his eyes. No one you need concern yourself with. Don't cry, he cooed at Tyrian. You know what they say about mad dogs. In an instant, he snatched the scorpion's semblance away forevermore, claiming it as his rightful plunder. Tyrian felt it and gasped. They get put down. His prize secured, he spun the faunus right round and grabbed his face with both hands, forcing Tyrian to look at him, committing his horrified visage to memory. If he was going to kill him, if he was truly going to set out down this blood-soaked path, then he would at least remember him. He owed that much to himself. A moment passed. Another elapsed. Now, a full 3 seconds went by. Satisfied at last, Naruto shifted his fingers ever so slightly, thumbs digging into the man's eye sockets with intent. Tyrian tensed in blind terror. Then he started to squeeze. No, stop, please, mercy, mercy. Tyrian began to beg, struggle, weep, even. It didn't save him. Naruto kept squeezing and squeezing and squeezing as the lunatic screamed, his cries pitching higher and higher until finally, pop goes the scorpion. Tyrian wasn't in his head as thank the gods for small mercies. Naruto noticed it rather quickly as he emerged from the portal, if only for the sweet, blessed silence that followed the lunatic's demise. He had full hold of the scorpion's semblance. Anything that let him cut through aura was damn useful, but there was no presence lurking within alongside it, no unwanted guest, as it were. Ordinarily he wasn't one to look a gift horse in the mouth. Boot. Welcome back, sir. He muttered a half-hearted greeting to Emerald in return and flung himself down in the first chair he found. He didn't even have the heart to correct her for calling him sir again, much less look for Amber. His mind was already elsewhere, parsing through his latest acquisition and all the perks that came with it. So far there didn't seem to be a downside for this, but why, his lips pursed at the thought. What was the difference here? He'd missed something. Some small shard of Cinder's soul had come along for the ride when he killed her and took her semblance. Yet subsequently, when he'd killed that punk with the electric semblance back in the store, he didn't get another nattering soul in his head. But after he stabbed Adam and threw him off the train, he did appear, albeit it took a bit longer than Cinder. Then he'd beaten Raven within an inch of her life, yet still snatched her semblance. So no voice there, if only because he'd endeavored to keep her alive. Tyrian was very much of the dead persuasion, however, yet he had his semblance. And no voice, meaning he was currently 2 for 5. But was his absence such a bad thing? Really, 2's company, 3's a crowd, and all that. Maybe it had something to do with ego or perhaps strength. In addition to death, Cinder and Adam were both true, but they'd been somewhat sane. Tyrian wasn't, and he had all but broken the mad faunus even further before bursting his head. Maybe that was the cause. And speaking of voices in his head, he could still feel the power of spring simmering inside him, not angry, but restless. Dare he say eager? Was that the right word? It whispered in his ear like a child even now as he sat here, longing to be free, to whirl and dance and sing to its heart content. Play, I wanna play. Yup, no ignoring that. He'd heard another voice just now. It almost sounded like a young girl. Nope, not going anywhere near that landmine. The last thing he needed was a kid in his head. Assuming that's what the power of spring meant, no, stop thinking about it. He didn't want to dwell on this problem right now, much less solve it. We'll play later, he muttered. I'm busy right now. Oh, he glared at his hand instead, frowning as it sparked fitfully. Still no dice. He couldn't call upon the maiden's power. Just what was it? Exactly where did it come from? How had it latched onto him? Why couldn't he use it? So many questions, and nary a single answer between them. He knew what a maiden was in theory thanks to Saffron, but this power felt old, more ancient than anything he'd encountered before. Seemed Saffron was right. It really wasn't a semblance. Adam was suspiciously silent. Cinder too. Neither of you know anything. Possibly, the former hedged. There are legends passed down among my people of warrior women with great powers, gifts bestowed by the gods themselves. Absurd, Cinder scoffed in his head, cutting him off. Superstitious nonsense. This power came from one man and no other. She was clearly sulking, but couldn't ignore a chance to one-up them, something he used to full advantage by holding his tongue. It came from Ozma, or as you now call him, Ospin. I know little more than that. Adam scoffed. Liar. You bragged otherwise to me when we first made. Cinder made a strangled noise in her throat. Fools should be silent. Naruto gave her a nudge. This Oz must have been powerful then. He was. Really, it was all too easy, goading her into speaking. In a sense, he still is, though he was much diminished by splitting his power. And you want that power. It wasn't a question, he knew her desires all too well. It is mine by right. Mercury, the sheer fervor in her voice had him reeling back for a moment as she railed at him. I had a plan, it would have been glorious, that illusion girl would have served me well if only I hadn't gone for you first, and now you have another maiden with you, it's not fair. Tough. He shrugged one shoulder. You played your hand and lost. Deal with it. Adam offered a low whistle. Then I need some ice for that one. Naruto laughed. Damn it all, Cinder made angry Cinder noises, raging impotently against them. Both of you. Just you wait, this isn't over without warning. Her once sullen voice gained a silken spite that hadn't been there before, vibrating with subtle menace. There are horrors you have no knowledge of, monsters you can't comprehend. You're strong, Mercury, I don't deny that, but your strength means nothing against her. You'll see soon enough. And then I'll have the last laugh. You'll see. Would he? Probably not. He wasn't here for any world-saving shenanigans. Or any mad meddling maidens for that matter. Speaking of which, where was Amber? He should have heard from her by now. Mildly concerned, he drew Adam's sword and used Raven's semblance again. A crimson tear opened in reality once more as a portal spawned. Imagine his surprise when the fall maiden tumbled out of it and landed in a heap at his feet. Emerald snorted into her hand. You all right there? Evidently not, because Amber sprang to her feet, eyes ablaze. What the hell was that? She glared at him with her glowing gaze. I've been falling for 5 minutes. Have you? He scratched at the back of his head with a rueful laugh. Sorry, haven't really ironed out this semblance yet. It was the wrong thing to say. Amber blinked. This semblance. Might want to sit down, it's a bit of a long story. Mercury was insane. Amber had known from the beginning that her new friend was a bit off, but she still hadn't expected him to be quite this broken, or so brutally honest about it. He made no attempt to hide what he was from her either, didn't even make an effort to conceal his abilities, let alone what he'd been up to since they last spoke. Somehow that terrified her even more than any duplicity on his part would have. He could snatch semblances, the very essence of someone's soul, and he could just reach an hand and scoop it out like it was ice cream or something. Her throat went dry at the very thought as she sank into the couch. She asked her questions and the answers didn't sit well with her. I can take the semblances and energy of others. There are conditions, of course, he prattled on as she balked at him. I have to shatter someone's aura, break them mentally or physically before I can take a semblance. Then again, compliance is also a factor. I had at least someone offer themselves up willingly. There was a strange twist to his words just then that got her hopes up, but he barreled on before she could grasp it. Really, it's a bit of a pain sometimes, but I won't deny that it has its uses. Steadying herself, she crossed one leg over another. And how many do you have now? Well, when last we spoke, I really only had the one. Oh, good, then. Relief was sweet. Boot, he began counting down on his fingers. I've been petty busy since. Emerald snorted. Tell me about it. How many do you have now anyway? 5. 6, actually. He amended with a gentle glare her way. Just got another. Her face lit up. Oh, you killed the scorpion, then? Yup. He clicked his tongue, producing an audible smacking sound. Pop goes the weasel. Amber's world spun Eve as an arctic chill shot down her spine. Why tell me all this? Because I trust you. Mercury's smile was sincere. You won't tell anyone. I won't. Emerald gripped her weapons. Not if you want alive. Mercury laid a hand on hers. No need for that. We're all friends here, aren't we? Was that a threat? It didn't sound like one to her. Was he that naive? No, surely he couldn't be. There was an innocence in his eyes. Amusement maybe, but he didn't strike her as the sort to blindly believe in others at the drop of a hat. So why entrust her with such a secret? It was maddening. She had to know. She could fight them and flee. She might even escape. She was almost tempted to. Mercury's last remark came back to haunt her. Hesitation is defeat. So she wouldn't hesitate. But a thought struck her just then. She didn't have to fight at all. With that power of his, she could be rid off eyes, that was it. Well, her hand shot up. Me do me. A silver brow rose and she flushed. You know what I mean. Mercury tilted his head, both baffled and bemused. Do I? Amber wasn't having it. She lunged to her feet, dodged past Emerald too slow girly and latched onto Mercury's jacket. From there she yanked him close, all but smacking her forehead against his in her haste to get at him. She had no doubt he could have broken her grip 7 ways to Sunday, but instead he let her hold him, his gaze evenly meeting her own. Take my power, please. I may. A maiden? Yes, I know. He waved a hand. No need to shout. Tyrian was pretty vocal about it. For the love of I didn't even know what a maiden was yesterday, and now I've met 2 of my maiden magnet or something. 2 that just made her curious and jealous. No doubt he saw it in her eyes. Who's the second? He shook his head. She's not anymore. Aha, so it does work. Hey, he gave her cheek a pinch, drawing a whine from her. She found me, not the other way around. I'm already holding the power of one maiden, and I'm not keen to go for two at the moment. Emerald raised her hand, observing the scene with thin-lidded amusement. I volunteer as tribute again. Mercury rounded on her with a splutter. Boy, cut that out. Amber spun with him. Are you sure this power it's not a gift, it's a curse? Her lip curled in a sneer. I'd still use it better than you. Wouldn't be afraid of it, either. Why I was trying to be nice. Hey. And then Mercury twitched. Naruto twitched. He had good reason to given what just happened. A rush of memories flooded his head, so poignant and startling that he darn near fell over. One of his hidden shadow clones had just dispelled themselves. That wasn't the problem. It meant they were doing their jobs. No, the problem in what said clone had seen, what he was seeing even now, its life flashing before his eyes. He saw an image of a descending bullhead, and there, standing in full view on the ramp, a man with a cane. Ospin. His eyes widened, narrowed, then widened again. Already it was too soon. He'd only just collected the bounty. Beacon said Master should have taken days to show up. Nope. All the nope, he wasn't getting dragged into his nonsense. Adam made an annoyed noise. Did you honestly expect someone like that to adhere to reason? The power of spring stirred restlessly in him. Leave. Cinder crooned darkly in his head. Told you so. Naruto slapped a palm to his forehead. This is just great. No, really, it is. Amber tilted her head. Wait, are you being sarcastic, or are you happy because I can't tell? I am 100% sarcasm right now. Time to leave. No more Ansel, we're getting out of here. Emerald winced. But what about Saffron and Jaune? We have their numbers. Sure, but shouldn't we at least say goodbye before? He brought his boot down. Hard. She must have realized that he'd put all his strength into said stomp because the ground absolutely burst beneath his foot. No, more delays. He fixed her with a withering glare. Ospin is here. We're leaving Ansel. Ospin. Amber panicked outright. We can't stay in Vale. He's strongest here, has the most influence. He won't rest until he's brought me back into the fold by hook or crook. Don't worry. He absently tousled her hair as he moved to pack his things. We were already planning on leaving. His mind whirled to the fore as he considered their next destination. He didn't like sand, and the idea of snow didn't appeal to him without warm garb, which they were lacking. Menagerie sounded like a good place to be cornered, so no thank you. Mistral it is, then. Amber jumped him. My hero. Emerald wasn't having that and promptly grabbed her. Leave off, you're smothering him. Time to go. He took advantage of their squabble as they wrestled and slashed at the air, only to remember too late what it was that Raven's semblance did, exactly. It created portals to bonded ones. Not just his, but those Raven held a living bond with. Really should have thought on that. Naruto thrust his head through the tether he'd created and found himself face to face with a blonde mini Raven. She jolted upright from where she lay, sprawled amidst the grass, wide lilac eyes bulging in disbelief. Who the hell are you? Nope. He jerked backward and slashed it shut before she could think to lunge in after him. Another attempt led him to a rather robust blonde bastard singing in the shower. He saw things he was not meant to see amidst the steam. Saw his eyes. He retreated with a mental scream before the brawler could see him and slashed at the air again. Nothing happened. So much for the third time being the charm. Oh, he glowered at the air when nothing happened. Come on, you're my semblance, now get us out of here, anywhere but here. No. He overcharged it with his chakra and pushed until he felt something twist deep inside him. Before his very eyes the air shifted, taking on a brighter tinge, more scarlet than crimson. Curious. He poked his head through it and glimpsed a burned, abandoned hamlet ahead. Wherever it was, it didn't look like here. Worked for him. Back he came. Better than nothing, come on. He swept up Emerald and Amber. In you go. Ospin had made many mistakes. More than anyone living or dead, more than any many, woman or child. He didn't much enjoy being reminded of said mistakes through said lives, though they were worth repeating, for he'd learned from each. Raven Branwen was one such mistake. He had led her astray through inaction on his part, exposing her to secrets for which she wasn't prepared. He was the reason she'd gone down the path she had. And while it baffled him that she had somehow resurfaced here in Vale right under his nose, it didn't change the fact that she remained one of his students. In that regard, he'd brought Kuro with him just in case she made the portal out. Not that it looked like she could or would, mind you, what with her body sprawled out on the prison cot, her head swaddled in bandages and one eye swollen shut. All in all, she'd taken quite the beating. Even after all these years, his former student was no slouch. It would have taken a mighty foe to fell her indeed. He turned to address the constable in question, a large, balding, barrel-chested man clad in an ill-fitting sheriff's uniform. Do we know who did this to her? Aye, the man crossed both arms before his badge, an up-and-coming hunter. Beat the brakes off her and her lads by himself. Curiosity reared its ugly head in his herd. He always had eye out for talent. One boy did all this. Not a boy, a young man. The respect he had for him was clear. Tore through him like a bloody blender, ain't never seen the like. It was not unheard of, he supposed. Some hunters in training wandered the wilds for the sole sake of testing their mettle. Likewise, it was not beyond the realm of belief that one such individual would stumble upon Ansel and defend it. That one had been near be well. Miss Ark would not be pleased when she returned and learned of said close call. She might want to have words with said defender. As did he. Does he live here? No, came the gruff response. He took the bounty on her and moved on. Unfortunate. He prodded him ever so gently. Do you recall what he looked like? What's it to you? Mercury's done us good service, and if you're one of those lot looking for revenge. Ospin tried to hold it in. Really? He did. A startled laugh burst out of him, startling the sheriff and Kuro both. Forgive me. He thumbed a mirthful tear from the corner of his eyes and shook his head. I mean him no harm. Of that, you have my word. He'd grown rather used to recognition wherever he went. Was rather nice not to be known for once. Far be it from him to jeopardize the poor fellow. Now there's an idea. Here, he pressed a generous stack of lien into the startled man's hands. For your trouble, you may open the door now. Credit where it was due, the sheriff tried to look brave. He's sure about that if she tries to run. Rest assured, he stood just a little straighter, she will not. My associate and I are here to prevent such happenstance. You're a good one, ain't ya? Not always, not as much as he wished to be. I'd like to think so. A pause followed for a great while, so long in fact, that he thought himself ignored altogether. And then, Silver. Ospin paused, his hand on the cell door. I beg your pardon. You wanted to know what he looked like? The sheriff heaved a sigh and ran a hand through his thinning hair. The lad had gray hair and silver eyes. Fought like a right demon. Had a girl with him too, real quiet type that one. She had dark skin, green hair and bright red eyes. They both looked like they knew how to handle themselves, they did. And just like that, Ospin found himself intrigued again. A silver-eyed warrior, how rare. Miss Rose would be delighted. Well, Ruby would once she inevitably entered Beacon some years from now and realized what the true potential of said eyes. But that was neither here nor there. For now, there was work to be done. My thanks. He opened the cell. The very moment he did, Kuro swept past him with a face wrought like thunder. Ospin didn't have a chance to advise caution. His agent didn't give him the chance to even consider it. His old pupil stormed in and snarled down at his sibling. Wake the hell up. Raven still lay sprawled, but at his call she stirred, opened her good eye and turned her head to stare at them with her good eye. Comprehension flickered through that crimson orb, comprehension and perhaps a touch of confusion. That much was to be expected. Doubtless she wouldn't be happy to see the two of them. Ospin tapped his cane against the ground and braced for the outburst that was sure to come. Good morning, Miss Branwen. Raven blinked blearily up at him within her cell, and then she smiled at him. Hey, boss. Ospin paused. Boss. Raven must have been hit harder than he'd thought. She'd not called him that in ages. She tried to rise, only to notice the manacles binding her arms and legs. Her wounds seemed secondary to her by comparison. What's the big idea? Why am I chained up? It was too much for Kuro. He stormed forward and seized his sister by the scruff of her neck. Do you have any idea what you've done? No, she tilted her head, frowned, then looked past him. What is this place? Why am I here? Where's Taeyong and Summer? Brief. It hit Ospin like an Ursa. What is your last memory, Miss Branwen? What her very visage screwed up in confusion. What are you on about? We had one hell of a graduation party. You were there and as she looked down at herself and balked. Why am I wearing this getup? Feels like I got run over by a Goliath. Perhaps you should see for herself. Ospin offered the battered bandit his scroll, allowing her to see her reflection therein. Raven recoiled with a shriek. Ugh, why am I old? Her hands flew up to her face, flailing in vain. I have crow's feet. What the shit? Kuro growled, low and deep in his throat. Just how hard did she hit her head? She squinted at him. The hell do you mean I didn't hit my head? Your skull is literally covered in bandages. Amnesia. Ospin considered the prospect thoughtfully as the siblings began to squabble. It was possible he supposed traumatic brain injuries often caused memory loss, and in some cases radically affected the victim's personality. But this it was as if her very mind had been reset, turned back to that of her teenage years, large swaths of her memory utterly wiped out. But then that would mean. Raven stiffened suddenly, startling them anew. Where's Summer? Oh dear, right, screw this. Kuro stalked out the cell, shaking his head. I'm entirely too sober for this shit. Getting a drink. Raven called after him. Bring one for me. Raven, no. Raven, yes, she hollered back, being old as thirsty work. Ospin pinched the bridge of his nose in a vain attempt to stifle an impending migraine. He did no succeed. He'd come here prepared to punish Raven for her crimes, or barring that, offer her some small form of amnesty, provided she saw sense and agreed to work with them again. Fish didn't know what to do with this. Black and white he could handle, good and evil made sense, but this size was all gray, muddled and confusing. He didn't know what to do with gray. Clearly, this Mercury fellow had clearly done something to Miss Branwen, and yet he had fled rather than face him head on. Why had he done this to Raven and how? Moreover, wherever had he gone? Where indeed, something was wrong. Naruto felt it nudging at the back of his mind like a sharp splinter as he scanned his surroundings. From the moment they'd set foot in this dead, desiccated village, he'd felt something stalking them. Even now it lingered in the back of his mind like a wraith, haunting his every thought, setting his every nerve on edge. In all fairness, he didn't rightly know where Raven's semblance had taken them, only that it was somewhere far, far from Ansel. But how could he anywhere but here was a rather broad term. No, that didn't matter right now. He braced his right foot and felt his hackles rise. He could sense a presence here, but what where? R-E-A-R-G-H. Something crashed down behind them and he winced as his sixth sense shrieked a warning. Just an ear-splitting yowl of a beast rent the air. Amber and Emerald whirled to face the new threat, but he'd already beat them to it. Because you see, he knew that noise. Marcus Black might have been an ass, but the bastard was a thorough one. He'd made him learn of just about every grim out there. One had a scream like that. Ah, crap baskets. Knuckleheavy. This one was large even by his standards, a ghastly fusion between horse and man with curving, hideous horns and ghastly red eyes besides, darkness itself come to life. It shuffled forward on its black steed, crunching bones underfoot, heedless of the weapons embedded in its back. Those wretched eyes were fixed firmly upon them. It had only one thought, one reason, one reckoning. Death. But he felt no fear, only confusion. Why was such a beast there? Adam grimaced in his head. Well, that's unfortunate. For him. Oi, Amber tugged at his sleeve. We need to move before it. Emerald held up a finger. SHHH. He's got this. What she said. Naruto raised his right hand as the beast barreled forward, fingers clenching into a cruel claw. His palm sparked with vivid blue-white light as he called upon his second semblance, the one he'd snatched from that foolish thug shortly after encountering Emerald. He'd not really had a chance to utilize it properly. Its original owner hadn't realized even a tenth of its potential. But he did. Lightning leaped from his fingers, arcing toward the Grim in a torrent of pure plasma. The mindless beast charged right into it without a care in the world, heedless of the danger. Its baleful red eyes saw only prey and never once comprehend the trap. Mistakes were made. No sooner had it done so than its every muscle clamped down, thwarting its charge as it crashed to the ground. The abrupt impact broke one of its hind legs with an awful crack, and another scream rent the air, eliciting a wince from the lot of them. He closed his heart to it and fired off another blast, blowing off another leg just to make certain it couldn't run away. Cinder hummed sullenly. Not bad. I could do better. Heh. Throwing lightning at fools. There really was nothing more entertaining in this world. Kurama would have enjoyed this. As the creature writhed and spasmed in pain, unable to move, he looked to Amber. What's a greater Grim like this doing here? I've heard rumors of this place. The Fall Maiden hissed aside. The village on the outskirts of Mistral was wiped out overnight by a single Grim. Emerald winced. And what was the name of this village? Tsuruayuri. Well, shit. The name didn't much register with him. The Grim did, however, despite the terror its presence inspired. They could leave it be, he supposed, but that would be disrespectful to the dead. And yet he didn't really feel like dealing with it himself. Wait. He could kill two nevermore with one stone here. He stepped back. You're up, ladies. Amber blinked. Me, why do I have to? Emerald shoulder barged her out the way. Step aside, I can handle this by myself. Like, hell you can. What was that, bitch? Then let's make a game of it. He held up his finger, diverting their attention before they could come to blows once more. First one to kill that Grim chooses where we go once we're done with Mistral. Amber rounded on him. Atlas. Emerald was only a heartbeat behind. Vacuo. Naruto offered them a Cheshire grin. Don't tell me that, tell the Grim. Emerald burst forward in a rush of speed before he could finish. Early bird gets the worm. Amber jolted after her. Hey, no fair. What followed was a slaughter, simple and, well, not so clean. The poor knuckleheavy didn't know what hit it. They had it down, defeated, and destroyed in a matter of minutes. Wasn't hardly worth mentioning, really. The girls' so-called duel ended in a tie as both struck the killing blow. Amber lopped off the horse's head, just as Emerald did that of the rider. Pure poetry. All right, he hummed, watching the abomination dissolve. To the city. Things were finally starting to look up here. What could possibly go wrong? Everything was wrong. It was every bit Pyrrha's fault, of course. She'd been the one to pick this fight, gods. She was regretting it now. A fist whistled past her face, to which she clumsily ducked, only for her foe to pivot and bring his right leg round to strike at her unprotected flank. She tried to block the oncoming attack, really, she did, but she wasn't ready and they both knew it. Her foe's merciless boot smashed into her guard like a falling star and struck her chin, snapping her head back. Even as she reeled, he swooped in and hammered his fist straight into her sternum, then her neck, followed by her solar plexus, leaving her gasping for air. Pain, stars, entire galaxies. An open palm smacked her collarbone and launched her backwards with a startled yelp. Unprepared for her sudden flight, she crashed out of the room, Aura protesting as she hurtled into then through a nearby wall. It crumbled like so much driftwood, as did another, and still another. The people of Mistral just didn't build things to last, did they? Her back struck the ground, then momentum dragged her down, sending her tumbling out into the foggy street. You all right there, little Miss Champion? A familiar voice sang to her through the mist. Did I kick you too hard? Green eyes narrowed. She tried to rise, only to wince as her flagging aura protested feebly at the motion. And not it. Mercury Black emerged, hands in his pockets. He tilted his head and grinned at her, eyes smoldering with menacing silver flames. That's the spirit. How had it come to this? Welcome to Mistral. Naruto quirked an eyebrow at Amber, stood in the street as passerby scuttled by, arms flung up in the sky, towards buildings so high. You've been waiting to say that, haven't you? Maybe, Mercury. She pivoted to face him and her dark face flushed yet darker still as he looked on. She linked both hands behind her back, swaying in place as she drank it all in. I used to visit the city when I was younger. Before, well, you know. Her eyes flickered with the flames of fall for a moment before she doused them. I'm just excited. We can sleep in actual beds tonight. Curious choice of words. Did you live here in the city? Maybe. She tilted her head a touch to the left and touched a finger to her chin, considering her surroundings with unvarnished interest as a child might some long-lost toy. I don't remember most of my childhood. My parents like to move around a lot, I think. Wait, are your parents? Moving on. Emerald thrust herself between them wearing a sweet, saccharine smile, and for once, he found himself grateful she'd interrupted. It's getting late. She grabbed him by the arm and not successfully lassoed Amber with the other, all but hauling them forward. Why don't we find a hotel for the evening and get a bite to eat? Adam and Cinder made annoyed noises in his head at the mention of food, even as Spring cooed happily at the reminder. Oh, the Fall Maiden perked up. So we can plan our next move from there. Right. Naruto waved a hand flippantly. Sure, we can do that, I guess. Their words were met with silence. He looked down, only to find both Amber and Emerald staring at him. His apprentice coughed into her fist. You do have a plan, don't you? He looked toward the setting sun with a lazy yawn. Not particularly at the moment, why? He could almost hear their jaws hitting the floor behind him. Both girls stopped with such force that he physically found himself dragged backward. More than a few passerby chuckled at his plight. Others glowered his way, utterly unaware of the predicament he found himself in. Amber found her voice first. Why do you mean, no? Means no. Thought that was obvious. We get that. Did they? He didn't think they did. Maybe he ought to explain himself. I don't have any concrete plans beyond avoiding Ospin and his cronies for the foreseeable future. Beyond that, well, he shrugged one shoulder. I already said I want it all. Might as well enjoy the good life while we got it, yeah. But how do you intend to take it this from Amber? Not sure yet. He thumbed his nose. Might pick a few fights here, shop around for the odd semblance or two. I'll figure it out as we go. Cinder purred in his head. I like it. There's bound to be a few useful ones here so long as you don't acquire any more voices. Amber wilted a little. You're only taking semblance from bad people, right? Right. Emerald coughed into a fist to hide her smile. Most from people he fights, Sue maybe. Hey, now he pinched her cheek, drawing a petulant whine from the illusionist. Just who the hell do you think I am? I'm not some mustache-twirling villain who snatches ice cream from kids. I've got taste, and I'll even share if I find some good ones. He had a feeling he could too. The sensation was already engraved within him. If he could take, then why not give as well? It would be a fine way to keep Amber and Emerald safe. Emerald's hand shot up, despite him still pinching her. Dibs on the sparkly fingers. I'd love to shoot lightning at fools. He crept up the back of his neck as he released her face. It's not called that. Red eyes fluttered shut and open in a quick blink. Then what do you call it? Naruto opened his mouth to answer. Closed it? Now, you know what, I haven't really thought of a name for it. He held up a hand to temporize when she threatened to pester him. Just relax, I've got this under control. Amber scuffed the sidewalk with her shoe and muttered under her breath. Could have fooled me, Mr. I have Noplins. He quirked a silver brow her way. I'm sorry, did you say something, Miss Maiden who owes me her life? She quailed a little beneath his heated glare, shoulders slumping. Meep indeed. Now come on, let's find a place to crash. We've earned it. Still, he had the strangest feeling he was forgetting something. Or was it several somethings? Nah, probably nothing. Right, sometimes the smallest stone can create the greatest ripples. In due time, those ripples become a tidal wave, and all of Remnant would feel it. Can I count on your cooperation in this matter, my old friend? Yes, of course, Ospin. Lionheart pinched the bridge of his nose and stifled a sigh as he held the scroll to his ear. I'll keep an ear to the ground and let you know if I encounter anyone matching their description. Thank you, Leo. Ospin's voice crackled on the other end, made slightly grainy by distance. I've already informed James and Theodore of our newfound friends, shall we say. Haven's headmaster fought down a convulsive shudder. Friends, he said. More pawns for his war against Salem, more meat for the grinder. Coward though he might be, he was no fool. He knew precisely why Ospin wanted these two. More fools throwing their lives away in a battle against a woman who would never know the sting of death. Everyone looked to the light to him for salvation, but none realized just how deep the darkness could be. Sometimes, it felt like he was the only sane one left in this rotten world. Against all odds, he managed to perpetuate the farce and keep up the act, that smile, the easy grace of a man who looked far braver than he truly was. Excellent. That said, please don't attempt to detain this Mercury or Emerald should you encounter them. His brow furrowed. Why ever not? Putting aside the former's combat capabilities, there's no telling what might happen. Any attempt to contain one of them would likely spook the other, and then there's no telling what might happen. If this boy can beat Raven in a pitched battle, I dare say he could give you some trouble. True, I'm not the fighter I once was. Not by half. He was sure some of his upper-class students could best him as he was now. Students he would send to their death soon enough at the hands of Salem. They trusted him, and because of that trust, they would die. For all his preaching, he was no better than Ospin. Coward, hypocrite, murderer. Bile flooded his throat. He choked it down, lest he vomit. In any case, they might flee in such an event. Ospin was saying as he came back to himself. I wish to reward them most handsomely. Are you looking to poach them for beacon? Perhaps. The response might have sounded coy to him once upon a time, but it was glaringly obvious to him now. Leave that matter to me, but do let me know if you happen upon them. I'll see it done. Thank you, my old friend. I knew I could count on you. Yes, of course, Ospin. Leave it in my hands. I'll handle things. He kept the mask in place, maintained his smile right until he hung up. The moment he did, that strong smile became a fearful frown. He hunched low over his desk, fumbled for a wastebasket and reached into it. heaved, until his body had nothing left to give. Only then, once he'd voided the contents of his stomach, did he find the strength to rise. Groaning, he sat up and ran both hands through his hair. Someone who could not only best Raven Branwen, but disappear without a trace. Such gifts could prove dangerous in the wrong hands. Indeed, they might tip the balance entirely in this shadow war for Remnant. Should his old friend acquire such a useful piece, why, things might even turn in his favor. Which meant, I have to tell Salem about this, don't I? Well, maybe not just yet. He was far too stressed right now. Ignorance was bliss after all, and what you didn't know couldn't hurt you. Surely she would understand his reasons for this. Damn that woman. She'd truly broken him. Ah, to be young and fearless again. Jaune drilled relentlessly. Counter parry. Riposte and stab. Left, right, left again, pivot, feint, then counter. Crocea Morse flitted before him in a whirl of silvery steel, sharper than before, his movements infinitely more precise than the clumsy slashes he'd once had. He didn't so much destroy the training dummy, a crude thing of wood and pillows, as he did beat it down through sheer stamina. No sooner had he slashed it apart than he moved on to the next, raining down blows using the stance he'd been taught. On and on he went, pushing himself to his limits and beyond. He was making progress. Not as much as he would have liked, not yet, but thanks to Mercury he had something to work with now, a solid foundation to build on. He also had a time limit, which was good, because that made him want to strive all the more. 2 years. 2 years until Beacon. 2 years to convince Mom to train him. 2 years to prove his sisters and all of Ansel wrong. 2 years to get accepted at the best damn school in all of Remnant and become someone. No more weak spindly noodle arms, Jaune. Practice makes perfect. He could do better, he would be better, no, he would be better, maybe he'd even grown his hair out, get a warrior's wolf tail. He was going to be someone, a huntsman among huntsmen, the very best, like no one ever was. Now why did that last one sound familiar? Meh, probably wasn't important. Unbeknownst to him, he wasn't the only arc to have a turnaround. Saffron regarded the shattered boulder before her, looked to her right hand, now, back to the boulder. The eldest arc child heaved a sigh, shoulders slumping. Of course I unlock my semblance after he leaves. She hadn't even punched the damn thing, she'd only touched it and it shattered. That darn Mercury. She knew this was his fault somehow, and he'd left without saying goodbye, too. She wanted him to meet Tara. Young screamed, Mom. Raven screamed right back, I have a kid. Young smacked his forehead and muffled a groan into another couch pillow. For crying out loud. He had known this would be a shitshow from the moment Ospin broke the news to him. He'd known, the second Raven had come blundering back into their lives. The instant he laid eye on her and she smiled at him, that things were bound to go south at some point. Even so, he hadn't expected it to be quite this spectacular. Maybe that wasn't quite the right word. Spectacular at least implied some small smidgen of sanity. This was not sane. This was a damn disaster. Ruby tucked herself into his side and patted his shoulder. There, Daddy, it's all right. He hugged her close. Bless baby girl. Best goddamn gift Summer ever gave him. He'd never missed her more than he had in his moment. Ruby's mother would have taken charge of the situation by now. She would have cracked some skulls, sat everyone down on the couch and made them hash things out. It would have been just. But she wasn't here. She never would be again. Ospin had fled like the coward he was, leaving him to hash things out. Well, he wasn't of much use right now, given he was passed out on the floor, bottle in hand. Bastard wouldn't be waking up anytime soon. Sua, you were really my brat, huh? Raven stepped forward to regard Yand, raised her hand and ruffled her hair. We made a cute kid, Ty. A roguish grin curled her pale face, and for moments she looked so much like her younger self that it hurt. Even if you do look old as dirt. Young wriggled out from under Raven's palm, growling as she went. Don't talk to me like that. Why not? Raven's retort proved just as sharp. I'm your mom. I carried you to term and popped you out. Probably spent hours in labor, too, not that I can remember them. Black, his daughter gagged and reared back like she'd been slapped. I don't want to hear about your damn labor. Young clicked his tongue, admonishing her. Young Zao, long language. Raven rounded on him with an incredulous snort. You gave her your last name. Young Branwen sounds better. Damn her amnesia. He wanted to be angry with her. And he was. Furious, really. But when she looked at him like that, acted like that, talked to him like they'd just got so damn nostalgic. It reminded him of the good old days. You know, back when Team STRQ was strong, united, invincible. When it was just them, taking on the world. What fools they'd been. No one was invincible. He'd learned that lesson when Summer died. But right now, Ruby looked lost, and Yang, better defuse that bomb before it blew up in his face. Listen, girls. He held up a hand for silence before Yang could haul off and hit someone. I don't know how else to put this, but Yang, your mother. She isn't. Recently lost her memory. He talked over her with the patience of a weary father. She took a bad hit to the head and was injured. We're going to be looking after her for a while until she recovers. Yang planted a fist on her hip. Is that why she's acting like a teenager? Raven glared right back. That why you're acting like a bitch? Okay, that was a good one. But still you left. Why would I do that? Raven's confusion was too genuine to have been faked. I'd never leave one of my own behind. Yang's arms drooped at her sides, hands balling into furious fists. But you did. Raven spluttered. No, I didn't. Yang glowered. Did not. Raven. She never admitted her mistakes. Stubborn birdie. She'd rather die than admit an error. Even now, when faced with the potential parental pain of her past and those she'd abandoned, his long-lost wife did what she always did, deny, refusing to even acknowledge the mistakes she'd made with Yang. Even if I had left, she rallied, which I'm not saying I did, I would have taken you with me. Great, Yang spat, because that changes everything. Thanks ever so much, bitch. Aura flashed as Raven's palm cracked clear across the face. Yang reeled back, eyes wide. They blazed red. Taeyong set Ruby down and sprang to his feet. Yang, no. Yang, yes. His daughter reared back with a yowl, semblance flaring, and slugged her mother in the face. Raven didn't even deign to dodge. She stood her ground and took the blow right on her cheek. She must have willingly lowered her aura at the last second, because he saw blood whistle through the air and a tooth besides that was going to be a pain to reattach as her head snapped to the side. She staggered back one step, grunted now, and glared bloody red daggers at Yang. He feared the worst. Raven never took a punch without dishing one back twice as hard, but if she dared to lay a finger on Yang again. And then his ex-wife preened like her namesake, teeth flashing in the low light. There's that Branwen spirit, you're one of mine, all right. Yang trembled, the roaring flames of her anger dimming. That's not fair, you're supposed to be angry, not happy. Why wouldn't I be? Raven thumbed a line of blood away from her nose and beamed. You're strong, Yang. Taeyong's jaw clicked open and hung agape. Ruby politely pushed it shut to keep him from catching flies. No, never mind that. Who was this woman and what had they done with his bitter wreck of a wife? 3 long strides carried Raven forward, devouring the distance between her and Yang. Their daughter tensed, fearing the worst. It came quickly. Raven struck like her namesake, darting forward to wrap both arms around their daughter's head and all but dragging her face into her bosom. As far as hugs went, it was a rather nice one, especially for a former bandit. She held her close, rocking slowly from side to side as one might a small child, and to his dismay and delight, actually began to hum under her breath. Yang struggled fitfully at first, then haphazardly, now ineffectually, unable to escape. Finally, with a sob, she relaxed into her mother's embrace. Raven sighed. Did I really never hold you like this even when you were a baby? What was I thinking? Yang quivered in her grasp, but her once strong voice lacked its usual rancor. Bitch of a mom, surly daughter of mine. Ruby made a baffled noise and raised her head. Suo, are we good now, or? Raven tilted her head, having only just noticed her. Didn't realize Summer had a minim. Who's the lucky bastard? Don't tell me it's Kuro. The drunken louse groaned at their feet. Uncle Kuro. No Tai coughed into a fist. She saw well, Ruby's mine. Raven went terribly still, enough eyes bulged. Summer had a kid with you, out came Omen in a flash of bloody steel. That no good cheating bitch, where is she? I'll teach her to take what's mine. She dead. All eyes turned to Ruby. What? Raven all but croaked at the word. The poor girl wilted under her gaze, but held her ground. Yang piped up reluctantly, still held close. Mom, Summer's died a long time ago. Raven blinked, shook her head, blinked again. Don't lie to me, pipsqueak, that shit isn't funny. She's dead, Raven. Taeyong laid a hand on her shoulder. She took a mission and never came back. Raven shook her head once more. No, she would never's promised. Something quivered behind those red eyes. Fractured, shattered. Omen fell out of her grasp and clattered to the floor. Tai tensed. Even then he wasn't prepared. His ex-wife screamed suddenly, sharp and shrill, clutching her head. Her legs buckled as she sank to her knees, but even then, it didn't stop. Rather, Raven couldn't. She kept screaming and screaming until her voice failed her and she coughed blood. With that, the shock finally became too much. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Raven collapsed at their feet. Do you understand why I've summoned you here? Salem let the words ripple through the dining hall and pass down the table. Each word carried the weight of her expectations and her bitter, bitter disappointment. Watts and Hazel studiously avoided her gaze and devoted themselves to their associate and touched meals. Neither could bring themselves to eat, but neither could they look her in the eye at that. She couldn't blame them for their silence. It had been some time since she last called such a meeting, and with half their number felled at that. They knew this wouldn't be anything good. No point in blunting the blade then, as it were. Cinder is dead. Watts snorted. A pity. It seems Shova stepped. Do stop smiling. We've lost Tyrian as well. His smile died an ugly death. How Hazel rumbled. We've hunted maidens before. The current inheritor of Fall was no match for Tyrian. And yet he lies dead while she roams free. My Grim discovered his body. Her pale lips pursed at the memory. What was left of it? Tyrian Kalos had not died well. Someone had massacred him, popped his head like a grape, and left his body for the buzzards. There was barely anything left of him by the time she tracked him down. Her pawns tensed, because that's what they were to her. Pawns, pieces to move across the proverbial chessboard of eternity. She didn't particularly care about Watts or Hazel one way or another, but it was somewhat annoying and time-consuming to train up fresh replacements. She might have to do that regardless at this rate. What with her main maiden candidate dead and her best assassin a tattered corpse, she only had these 2 louts remaining. Mindless muscle and a spy who wasn't half as smart as he thought he was. They seemed more useless by the day. Good help was so hard to find these days. But she knew the culprit. Ospin is hunting us. She steepled her fingers and laid her chin atop them. I have reason to believe he was the one who killed Cinder and Tyrian. Hazel growled. You're certain it's him? Yes. He was recently sighted on a bullhead returning to Vale. Returning, Watts bridled, his mustache bristling like some great hairy caterpillar. He left. He did indeed. It had been a bit of blind bloody luck really. One of her smaller Nevermore had spotted his craft by pure chance and followed. Were it not for that, she would have been none the wiser toward her ex-husband and his little jaunt. Why didn't you inform me of this, Watts? He slumped in his seat. I wasn't aware. No, you were not. She bit off the words before he could hope to speak them. See that you are in the future. As an immortal, Salem found the very best threats were often those that were best left unspoken. The victim's imagination could and would be far darker than any doldrums she conjured. After all, nothing broke someone quite like their own fears. Naturally, Watts couldn't keep quiet after that. Where did he depart from? She smiled for him. It was not a nice smile. A homely little village known as Ansel. Watts rallied at that. Well, there you have it. There are many far-flung settlements out in the wilds. I can hardly have eyes and ears in all of them now, can I? Nevertheless, he will visit it and learn why he was there. As you wish. There it was. She could see the anger in his eyes, the humiliation, but he didn't dare defy her. It will be done. Yes, it will. Ospin is gathering his pawns while wiping out our own. She looked to Hazel in return. Losing Cinder I could tolerate, but now Tyrian as well, it's time to take action. Hazel growled again, low and deep in his throat. You think he's going to make another push? I do. Nonsense. Arthur huffed. Atlas has been silent. Whatever this is, Ironwood isn't involved. My agents on Menagerie reported the death of Adam Taurus some days ago, but none have taken credit for it. Why would Ospin stoop to killing a terrorist? Why indeed, who knew Ozma's schemes were many? And what a vacuo. Hazel back she went to the grumbling Goliath in the room. Did your search bear fruit? Hazel was silent for a long moment, perhaps gathering his thoughts or planning to deflect blame onto his compatriot. At length, he drew himself and spoke. I could not locate the Summer Maiden. Salem's right hand twitched, conjuring a web of shadowy claws at his feet. Is that so? However, he hastened to add, during my search, I encountered a black market group known as Crowned by a pair of siblings with rather curious semblances. She paused. Go on. They're something of a rogue organization, their leaders styling themselves as the next queen and king of Vacuo. Salem scoffed. Another group hearkening for the old days of the monarchy. How quaint. And what are these semblances you speak of? She had seen many in her eons of existence, as Hazel well knew. It must be something special indeed to pique his interest. And their names? Jax and Jillian Asterius. He squirmed under her gaze. The girl can drain aura and add it to others but her brother. Why was he hesitating to spit it out? Hazel. I haven't all day. She most certainly did and more, but she wasn't about to tell him that. This was something different, something new, a change in the incessant back and forth of her and Ospin's little shadow war. For better or worse, Hazel had unwittingly aroused her interest, and she'd be damned if she let him wriggle away now because he wasn't comfortable. Mind control. The words alone had her sitting up straight. He can control the minds of others. Watts scoffed. Preposterous. Such a thing would be. Magic, Salem crooned darkly. He cut off with a sputter. Salem looked back to Hazel up, years of boredom washing away in an instant. Tell me more. This boy and his sister, are they trained? Hazel dared a nod. They're recent graduates from Shade Academy. Excellent. This way she could acquire both a powerful tool and a useful maiden candidate with little effort. She would have to break the girl's bad habits, of course, cleanse her of her folly, make her strong, but this was so much better than raising a runt from scratch. Why, she might even be better than Cinder. That girl had been far too arrogant for her own good. Can they fight? Well enough, Hazel rumbled on, distracting her from her doldrums. When I confronted them, the girl tried to drain my aura and the boy sought to control my mind. Tried, meaning they did not succeed, the utter fools. Doubtless he'd discipline them for it. Hazel was one of, if not the sturdiest warrior in Remnant. It was next to impossible for anyone to break his aura and keep it broken, save perhaps her and Ospin. You could try, certainly, but with those dust crystals of his, you'd be the one worse for wear. Yet there were other ways to lay him low, as she well knew. You see, the most effective way to defeat Hazel was not to break his body, or even his mind, but rather his spirit. Not only did his semblance render him impervious to pain, but his aura recovered far quicker than most. In a fight you had to beat him down hard and fast or let him wail on you until he exhausted himself. Immortal as she was, she'd gone for the latter option when recruiting him. At the time he had, and very much still did, crave vengeance for his dear dead sister. Upon revealing herself to him as the Queen of Grimm, he'd promptly tried to kill her. Wasted an entire day doing so. In fact, once he realized the futility of his efforts, it was all too easy for her to redirect his anger at Ozma. What fools these mortals were. But she digressed. She had new pawns to claim. Her head tilted just to. I trust you've taken measures to bring them into the fold. Hazel bowed low. I have begun making the necessary preparations, yes. I left them with a warning, my queen, they await your arrival. They do not believe me, but I suspect your presence will enlighten them. Enlighten them? Salem leaned back with a pleased hum. Indeed she would. Immortality had a tendency to make one realize the inevitability of things. Mind control. Was it Hazel's boundless and constantly regenerating aura most likely protected him from that nasty little semblance? But as she had no such defense, she would need to take mental measures against it. She didn't like the idea of anyone running about with a semblance like that. Well, anyone not under her thumb. This so-called king would face a true queen, and if he wouldn't bend the knee, he would die and she would make use of his corpse. Simple as. Now, then, there was work to be done. For the first time in centuries, she found herself rather curious as to the outcome. Well done, Hazel. I'm sending you to Mistral to check in on our dear friend Lionheart. Friend, really nothing further from the truth. The Once-Brave headmaster was far and away the most expendable of her pawns, but right now he had to use his Haven's headmaster for now. He's been rather silent as of late. Watts, I expect you an answer by week's end. You are dismissed, the both of you. If Ospin was becoming more active in his recruitment, well, then so would she. This meant war. Nothing could stop her now. Naruto sneezed mightily. Was someone talking about him? It would be just his luck if someone was. Amber laid a hand on his You all right there, Mercury? I'm fine. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Nothing to worry about. Sure, Emerald rolled her eyes, because that doesn't sound ominous at all. In that brief moment, he closed his own. Errors were made. They were his. A hooded figure came barreling around the bend out a nearby alley in that same instant, heedless of him or Emerald or even Amber, such was their hurry. He had just enough time to glimpse a slender form clad in bronze armor, startled green eyes, a flash of red hair and the faint scent of burnished leather paired with another aroma he didn't recognize, and then, look out, look out, look out. She crashed headlong into the three of them with a yelp and down they went, sprawling across the sidewalk. Through ringing ears and a horrible headache, he dimly heard a voice babbling apologies. I'm sorry. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.